Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. On a late autumn night, a driver named Mark Jensen guided his 18-wheeler through a stretch of desert highway that seemed more emptiness than land. The sky was moonless, the stars half smothered by thin clouds, and the road ahead was a narrow gray ribbon in his headlights. His cab hummed with the familiar vibration of the engine, a soft rattle in the dashboard, and the occasional whisper of the CB radio picking up distant static. Mark had been driving for years, long enough to know every major truck stop by smell and sight, long enough to recognize which miles felt normal and which felt a little wrong. This stretch between a small town called Ridge Hollow and the state line was one he didn't care for. He drove it anyway. The route paid well, and his company didn't believe in superstitions. But Mark remembered the first time an older driver had warned him about this particular run. "If you feel like you've been driving too long without seeing lights," the man had said over coffee and burnt toast, "you probably have. If the road feels empty, don't stop for just any place. Wait for the big chain stops, or keep going." When Mark asked why, the man only shrugged. "Some places out there aren't for us." It had sounded like the kind of thing drivers said to pass the time, like stories about phantom hitchhikers or weird weather. Mark didn't think about it much until this night, when his route took him into that same long, hollow stretch. The clock on his dashboard said 1:23 a.m. His eyes burned a little, but he wasn't truly tired yet. What unsettled him wasn't sleepiness. It was how quiet the road had become. He hadn't passed another truck in almost 40 minutes. No taillights far ahead, no oncoming headlights sliding past. Just the road, the black shapes of hills against the sky, and the unbroken night. The fuel gauge dipped lower. He had planned to refuel at Ridge Hollow, but a minor delay at the warehouse had pushed his schedule, and he decided to push on, trusting there would be at least one decent stop before the line. He could make it, but not with as much margin as he liked. He glanced at the CB radio. More static. No chatter, no weather reports, no voices at all. The highway sign he passed next was old and reflective, lit by his beams. It pointed ahead. State line. 76 miles. Ridge Hollow. 52 miles behind. No mention of any gas or food, just distance. Mark exhaled slowly, drumming his fingers on the wheel. He checked his GPS. The screen flickered once, then stabilized, showing the pale line of the road and nothing else in either direction for miles. No listed truck stops, no diners, just empty markers. "That can't be right," he muttered, then caught himself talking aloud and stopped. For 10 more minutes, the scenery didn't change. Occasional scrub brush, the low suggestion of desert on either side, the feeling that he was driving through a hollowed-out space. Then, as he rounded a slow curve, a glow appeared ahead, small at first, then brighter. Neon. He straightened in his seat. A sign came into view, old-fashioned and blue, haloed in the night by his high beams. Lone Palm Truck Stop, Gas Food Showers, Time Miles. The metal of the sign was rusted around the edges. The drawn palm tree on it was faded and cracked. The arrow pointed ahead, slightly crooked, but still clear. Mark didn't remember seeing the lone palm on his route before. The GPS didn't show it. But the idea of gas, a hot drink, and maybe a quick bathroom break made a solid kind of sense. He had enough fuel to keep going, but it would be tight and tense. If this place was open, it would solve that problem. 2 miles later, another sign appeared. This one newer but still a little old-fashioned. A tall roadside pylon with Lone Palm in red block letters glowing weakly. Underneath, smaller letters announced, "Diner, open 24 hours." A gravel driveway turned off from the highway, leading to a wide, mostly empty lot. The truck stop squatted in the dark like a low, square building patched together from concrete and metal, with a diner attached to one side. A single wavering neon palm tree blinked green above the diner window. Lights glowed inside. The lot was mostly empty. Only one other semi was parked near the far end, its cab dark, no movement around it. A few old cars leaned in the corner, as if they'd been there a long time. The gas pumps, 4 of them, tall and old, stood under a flat canopy, their lights buzzing faintly. Mark pulled in, gravel crunching under his tires, and parked near the pumps. The engine's rumble faded to a ticking quiet as he shut it down. Instantly, the night leaned in closer. Without the movement of the truck, the silence of the place seemed to deepen. He climbed down from the cab, the cool desert air brushing his face. A faint smell of dust, old gasoline, and coffee rode on the breeze. Somewhere, a bug buzzed around one of the canopy lights, ticking against the plastic cover. The pump nearest him had a digital readout, older, but not ancient. A small handwritten sign was taped to it. "Pay inside first. Thank you." The pen strokes were neat, looping. He glanced toward the building. Through the glass doors of the station, he saw shelves of snacks, dimly lit coolers, and a counter. A figure moved behind the glass for a second, then vanished into the aisles. The diner windows showed silhouettes, a person in a booth, a server at the counter, the glow of warm light, and the shift of shadows. Mark felt his shoulders relax a little. Whatever this place was, at least it wasn't abandoned. He headed for the door, boots crunching who knows what on the ground. Up close, the building showed its age, hairline cracks in the concrete, faded posters in the window advertising brands he hadn't thought about in years. An old soda company logo, long since changed elsewhere, still smiled in cheerful red and white here. The bell above the glass door gave a soft, old-fashioned ring as he stepped inside. The air was cool and slightly stale, but not unpleasant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rows of chips, candy bars, travel-sized toiletries, and dusty road atlases lined the shelves. A small, cooler case rattled faintly in the corner. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s or early 60s, hair gray at the edges, shirt with a stitched name tag that simply said, Walt. He smiled in a mild, distant way, as if he'd been smiling for a long time and had grown used to the shape of it. "Evenin'," the man said softly. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "Fuel?" "Yeah," Mark replied, stepping up to the counter. "Gonna fill up, and maybe grab a coffee." Walt nodded, eyes shifting briefly past Mark, as if checking something unseen. "Pump 3's live for you," he said. "Go on and fill. Coffee's fresh in the diner. You can pay all together after." Mark fished for his wallet and paused. "You take cards?" "Sure," Walt answered, the smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We take what folks have." There was something old-fashioned about his phrasing, but Mark didn't think much of it. He nodded and stepped back outside, the bell chiming again behind him. At the pump, he slid his card into the reader. The screen flickered, hesitated, then displayed simple block text. "See attendant." A little annoyed, Mark set the nozzle in the tank anyway. When he squeezed the handle, to his surprise, the pump clunked, and the digits began to roll, displaying gallons and dollars as fuel gushed into his tank. He frowned at the screen. It showed numbers but no price per gallon, just an old total inching upward. The pump hummed quietly, steady. He watched for a moment, then decided it was fine. It wasn't the first time an older station's electronics had been out of date. As long as fuel was going into the tank, that was what mattered. When his tank was full, he replaced the nozzle and headed toward the diner, drawn by the warm light and the faint scent of coffee and frying food. The diner felt like something left behind from a different era. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, each with a small silver napkin dispenser and a sugar caddy. A jukebox in the corner sat silent, its song list filled with names he recognized from his childhood, and some he didn't recognize at all. Framed black and white photographs of trucks and drivers decorated the walls, their eyes watching the room in permanent mid-laughter or mid-smile. There were people inside, but the place felt oddly still. A man in a cap sat alone at the counter, staring into a cup of coffee, not moving. A couple occupied a booth, their plates of food half finished, their faces turned slightly toward each other but their expressions fixed, as if frozen mid-conversation. A waitress in a pale blue uniform moved along the counter, topping off a cup. Her steps were light, but each one landed with a faint echo that didn't quite match the sound her shoes should have made. Her name tag, in the same stitched style as Walt's, read, Marla. She looked up as Mark entered. Her eyes were bright but distant, like someone who hadn't slept in a long time and had simply pushed past the need. "Sit wherever you like," she said, voice gentle. "Coffee's hot." Mark chose a booth near the window, where he could see his truck through the glass. He slid into the red vinyl seat. It squeaked under his weight. After a moment, Marla appeared at his table, holding a glass coffee pot. The steam curling from it smelled good, strong, and a little bitter. "Long haul tonight?" she asked, pouring into his cup without waiting for an answer. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't expect to find this place out here, honestly. Haven't seen any other stops for a while." Marla smiled faintly, eyes flicking briefly toward the window, then back. "Not everyone finds us," she replied. "But folks who need a rest usually do." The way she said it made a small, chill prick at the back of his neck. He took a sip of coffee. It was hot, rich, and old-fashioned, like something his grandmother used to make on a stovetop percolator. "You got a menu?" he asked, more out of habit than hunger. She set one down in front of him. The laminated pages were a little yellowed at the edges. The prices were strangely low for the current era: eggs and bacon for $3, a full dinner for $6. "That can't be right," he said before he could stop himself. Marla tilted her head slightly. "Been the same for as long as I can remember," she said. "We don't change much." He assumed they just hadn't updated the menus and braced himself to see a higher total when he paid. Still, something about the place continued to itch at his brain. The light had a certain muted quality, like an old photograph. The other patrons stayed unnaturally still. The man at the counter hadn't lifted his cup, hadn't shifted on his stool. The couple hadn't moved their hands closer or farther apart. It was as if they were holding poses. Trying to push the thought aside, Mark ordered a plate of eggs and toast, something simple that wouldn't weigh him down. Marla nodded, wrote it on a small pad with a real pen, and carried the slip back toward the open window of the kitchen, where a figure in a white apron moved in slow, precise actions. As he waited, Mark looked at the photos on the wall near his booth. One showed a group of truckers lined up in front of the Lone Palm sign, their rigs forming a backdrop. The trucks were boxy, older models. The drivers' hairstyles and clothes placed them somewhere in the late 70s or early 80s. He leaned a little closer. The glass reflected his own face faintly, but behind that reflection, he could make out one driver, whose eyes seemed strangely familiar. There was nothing specific about the man's face that matched Mark's, but something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his nose, triggered a small sense of déjà vu. Another photo showed the interior of the diner itself, nearly identical to how it looked now. Same booths, same windows, same jukebox in the corner. Only the people were different. The caption scribbled along the bottom edge read, "Lone Palm, 1983, Night Crew." The bell at the kitchen window dinged softly, and moments later, Marla placed a plate in front of him. The food smelled fresh, the eggs yellow and steaming. The toast browned just right. A little pat of butter glistened on top. Mark took a bite. It tasted normal. Good. Even. Not overly salty. Not greasy. Just simple, honest, diner food. It grounded him, pulled him away from the restless thoughts that had been building. A low murmur reached his ears. At first he thought it might be the man at the counter finally speaking, but when he listened harder, he realized it sounded more like the distant noise of many conversations layered together, turned down to a whisper. It didn't seem to be coming from any one direction. It was just in the room, under everything else. He looked around again. Now, the couple in the booth had shifted slightly. The woman's hand had moved closer to her glass. The man at the counter had tilted his head down a fraction of an inch. Little movements, so small they could have been imagined. "Quiet night?" Mark asked Marla when she came by to refill his cup. "They're all quiet," she said. "Out here, quiet's what we have most of." His gaze drifted past her, toward the clock on the wall. It was an old analog one, the kind with a white face and black numbers. The hands pointed to 2:05 a.m. The second hand ticked, except every now and then it stuttered, pausing for just a moment too long before jumping forward, then racing a bit to catch up. "How late are you open?" he asked, more to hear her answer than for any real need. "Always," she said. "You can rest here if you're tired. We have a few rooms out back. Showers. Clean beds." There was something tempting about that. His eyes did feel heavier now, and the idea of shutting them for even an hour or two in a safe place was appealing. But some part of him resisted, an instinct sharpened by years of sensing when something on the road wasn't quite right. He finished his meal, thanked her, and stood to go. As he reached into his pocket for his wallet, a voice spoke from the counter. "Nice night for driving." It was the man in the cap. His head was still angled down, but his mouth had moved. Sure," Mark replied. "Quiet out there." The man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His cap's brim shadowed his face so thoroughly that Mark couldn't make out his features at all. "Some roads don't like to be empty," the man murmured. "Best to keep moving. Don't linger too long in places that remember too much." Before Mark could respond, the man's hand slid around his cup, and he lifted it, taking the first sip Mark had seen him take all night. When the cup lowered again, the man's posture returned to its earlier, unmoving position. Unsettled, Mark went to the register to pay. Walt rang up his meal and fuel with slow, deliberate motions. "Fuel, eggs, coffee," he said. The cash register was an old model that chimed when he pressed the keys. The total that popped up on the display made Mark blink. "That's too low," he said. "Are you sure?" Walt smiled. "Our prices haven't changed in a while. You got what you needed. That's all that matters." The receipt paper curled from the machine with a soft hiss. He tore it off and handed it to Mark. The paper was faintly yellowed, the ink slightly faded, as if it had been printed years ago and only now delivered. On habit, Mark glanced at the dateline. It read, "The 27th of October, 1984. He almost laughed, assuming it was just a glitch in an old machine. "Guess the clock's off," he said. Walt didn't correct him. "It gets that way." The older man replied instead. "Clock's been wrong for a long time, but you've got miles left to go. Don't let the night get a hold of you." Something in his tone made the hairs on Mark's arms rise. He folded the receipt, slipped it into his wallet, and headed out, offering a brief nod to Marla and the still, silent patrons as he passed. Outside, the lot was colder, the night sharper. For a moment, he had the strange feeling that the stars above the lone palm were in slightly different places than they had been when he arrived. He brushed it off, climbing into his cab and starting the engine. The truck roared back to life, the familiar vibrations returning like an old song. He checked his mirrors, glanced at the building one last time, then pulled out onto the highway. The neon palm tree flickered in his mirror for a second longer than it should have, its green glow stretching improbable distances behind him, until finally it shrank and vanished into the night. As the miles rolled beneath his wheels, Mark felt a slow unease start to unwind inside him. He clicked on the CB, hoping for some comforting static or another driver's voice. Instead, for a long moment, there was absolutely nothing. No fuzz, no hiss, just a flat, empty silence. He turned the volume knob up. The needle on the display bounced, showing the device was powered and working. Still, the airwaves remained blank. Then faintly, a voice came through. A man's voice, slightly crackling, as if coming from very far away. "Any drivers out past Ridge Hollow tonight?" the voice asked. "Watch out for that old lone palm. Place has been closed down since '84. Fire took it. Sad thing. Shame for the folks inside." Mark felt the breath catch in his throat. He lifted the receiver slowly, his fingers tight around the plastic. "Say again?" he managed. "Lone Palm truck stop? Just fueled there. Place is open." Static responded, thick and uneven. It crackled for a full 10 seconds before the man's voice returned, sounding confused. "Negative," the other driver said. "Ain't no Lone Palm out there anymore, friend." "You sure you're on the right stretch of road?" Mark's heart thudded. He glanced at his fuel gauge. It showed full. Completely, unquestionably full. "I saw it," he said, though his voice came out softer than he intended. "Big red sign. Diner. People inside." The silence on the other end this time held a different quality. Then a third voice, older, slid into the channel. "Some say it shows up for whoever needs it," the new voice said quietly. "But folks who stay too long don't always leave. Best if you just keep driving. Don't go back looking." The first driver chuckled nervously. Old road tales. "Don't mind him," he said. "You're fine. Long as your tank's full and you're rolling, you're fine." The CB went back to normal static after that, other, more ordinary chatter, eventually filtering in weather, traffic, jokes, the kind of noise that made the night seem ordinary again. Mark drove the remaining miles to the state line with a strange, alert calm. He didn't feel sleepy anymore. If anything, there was a slight tremor in his hands that kept him more awake than coffee ever could. By the time the first hint of dawn bled into the sky behind him, he had almost convinced himself that fatigue and isolation had played tricks on his mind. Maybe the place had been an older, lesser-known stop that the others on the radio simply didn't remember. Maybe the broken register had printed an incorrect date, and he'd misread it in his tired state. When he turned in his fuel receipts at the company office the next afternoon, the clerk flipped through them absent-mindedly, logging the numbers into a computer. "This one's blank," she said after a moment, holding up a small slip of paper. "Printer must have jammed on you. You sure you filled up here?" She handed him the Lone Palm receipt. The paper was now completely blank. No logo, no numbers, no date. Just a pale rectangle of slightly yellowed nothing. Mark stared at it. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Pretty sure." He took the slip back. That night, in his motel room, he studied it under the lamp. No amount of squinting or angling brought back the vanished ink. On his next run along that same stretch of highway, he watched for the Lone Palm. He drove at the same time of night, at the same pace. His fuel gauge dipped lower, and he fought the urge to slow down, to give any hidden gravel driveway a chance to appear. No lights blinked on the horizon. No neon palm tree glowed green. The old blue sign he'd seen before. Lone Palm truck stop, gas food, showers, 2 miles, never appeared. He passed a weathered patch of land where, years ago, something might have stood. The faint outline of a foundation was visible in the morning light. Charred beams lay half buried in sand. A rusted signpost leaned at an angle, its sign long gone. Mark drove on, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand, the blank slip of receipt paper tucked into his wallet like a silent passenger. He never found the Lone Palm again. But sometimes, on long, empty nights, he would see a dim green flicker in his side mirror, just at the edge of sight. And when his fuel gauge dipped close to empty, he would feel a small, almost irresistible tug to look for a place that might only exist for drivers who had gone too far, for too long, on roads that didn't want to be empty. And he knew, without knowing how he knew, that if he ever chose to turn off the highway and follow that glow again, the beds out back would be waiting, clean, quiet, waiting for him to stay. Story number 2. In the wide level part of the country where fields seem to go on forever and towns appear only as faint clusters of light on the horizon, a driver named Lena Ortiz guided her rig through the dark. Her truck's cab was a small island of warmth and yellow glow in the ocean of night. The dashboard lights cast soft green and amber shapes, the radio dial glowed faintly, and the steady hum of the engine vibrated through the steering wheel and the soles of her boots. Outside the windshield, the world was reduced to 2 lanes of asphalt, and the pale fan of her headlights, bordered on either side by low, sleeping farmland. It was just after 2 in the morning, the hour when the mind starts to drift if you let it. Lena had been on the road since early evening, running a load of dry goods westward, timing her trip so she'd reach the next major town just after dawn. Between where she had been and where she was going lay a 60-mile stretch of highway with no services. No truck stops, no gas, no diners. Just the road, a few faded exits to farm roads, and the shapes of distant silos. She knew this stretch well. Other drivers talked about it in the way long haulers often talked about these lonely miles. Half complaint, half respect. The pavement was decent enough, but the emptiness had a way of pressing in. Out here, there was nothing to look at except the dancing reflection of her own headlights on the white stripes and the occasional reflective posts. Light fog had rolled in about 20 miles back. It wasn't thick enough to be dangerous, but it blurred the edges of the landscape, turning fence lines into soft gray smudges and making distant shapes look closer than they were. Her high beams cut twin tunnels through the mist. Lena took a sip from her travel mug. The coffee had cooled, but it was still strong, still bitter enough to make her blink once. A late-night talk show murmured over the speakers, the host's low, practiced voice interviewing someone about sleep habits and dreams. She turned the volume down a notch. Too many words at this hour made her feel like someone else was in the cab with her, and she preferred the illusion of solitude. A green highway sign flashed by on the right. She caught it in a glance. Rest area, 18 miles. Nothing unusual. She'd seen that sign many times before. The rest area itself was small and plain, not much more than a parking lot and a bank of vending machines. She rarely used it. She checked the clock. 2:07 a.m. The fog thickened just a little, the mist swirling lazily at the edges of the headlights. The talk show faded under a wash of soft static for a second, then came back. Lena frowned, adjusted the dial slightly, and lost the station altogether. White noise filled the cab. "Fine," she murmured, turning the radio off. Silence settled in. Only the engine, the tires, the faint rattle behind the dash. She reached over, switched on the CB instead. A buzz of static and faint, distant voices slid in. "Eastbound, you got a bear sitting at mile 58, lights off. Anyone catch that weather up near the pass? Heard there's black ice?" The ordinary language of the road flowed around her, soothing in its way. She left the CB running low. More for company than information. Mile marker 196 slid past on the right. A narrow strip of reflective metal, it flashed in her lights, then was gone. Lena had driven this route enough times to know roughly how long it took between markers when she was keeping steady speed. She watched the next few pass out of habit. 197. 198. 199. Everything in its right order. Fog brushed at the truck like slow-moving breath. She settled a little deeper into her seat, adjusted her grip on the wheel, and let her thoughts wander lightly. A text from her sister earlier, about a nephew's school play. A mental list of what she'd get at the next big truck stop. The faint ache in her shoulders that a stretch would fix. Another green sign emerged from the haze ahead. Rest area 18 miles. She blinked and sat up a bit straighter. For a few seconds, she wondered if she'd misread the first sign. Maybe it had said 28 instead of 18, and her mind had filled in the number. She checked the odometer. She'd gone almost 12 miles since the last sign. Not 10, but she could have been a little off in her mental math. It was easy to mistake things in the fog. The sign slid past and vanished into the rearview darkness. The highway flowed on, smooth and unbroken. A few minutes later, the CB crackled. "Anyone else out on 72 tonight? Over?" a male voice asked. It carried a frayed edge of strain, like someone trying to sound calm and not quite making it. Lena reached for the mic without thinking, pressing the talk button with a practiced thumb. "Copy, driver," she said. "Westbound on 72. You lost or just lonely?" There was a brief hiss of static, then the man's voice came back, closer this time. "Westbound, same as you," he said. "Name's Clay. I was wondering if you're seeing what I'm seeing out here." "Depends what that is," Lena replied lightly. "I see a whole lot of nothing. Night, fog, road." He gave a short, unsteady laugh. Yeah, that's about right. But, you pass a rest area sign lately? 18 miles? The skin on the back of her neck tingled. "Yeah," she said. "Couple minutes ago." Silence, then the faint click of him pressing his own talk button again. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that makes twice now." "Twice?" she echoed. "Maybe you just noticed the second one." "No," he said quietly. "That's the thing. It's the same sign. Same dent in the corner. Same bullet hole through the E. I looked close the first time. Thought it was funny. 18's my lucky number." Lena adjusted her grip on the mic. The trailer hummed behind her like a distant, heavy bee. "You sure about that?" she asked. "I'm sure," he said, "and I've been watching my miles. I've put 30 on since I passed it. Should have hit that rest area by now, but I haven't. Just open road. Same fence. Same little crooked tree every few miles." She forced a chuckle. "Sounds like you're just bored, Clay." "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "What mile you showing?" She checked the small green marker as it appeared ahead, counting down along the shoulder. "Mile 200, she said. 200, he repeated softly. 200. I've been at 200 for a while. You mean you just passed it too? She asked. No, he said. I mean, I keep passing it. His words settled into the space between them. The CB hissed faintly. Listen, he added a little faster. Humor me. When you see the next mile marker, tell me what it is. All right, she said. Give me a minute. She leaned forward slightly, watching the right shoulder. The fog drifted and parted. A new marker rose from the mist. Lambiling, mile 201, she reported. On the other end, Clay made a small sound, halfway between a sigh and a quiet curse. Thought so, he murmured. What are you? Zing? Lena asked. There was a hesitation long enough for her to hear the crackle of his cab's background noise over the line. A faint rattle, the soft whine of a slightly older engine. Mile 200, he said again. Still, been 200 the last 4 signs. I'm not slowing down. Odo's rolling like it should. But the numbers on the side of the road aren't moving. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Could be someone misposted the markers, she offered. Highway crew messed up. Happens. It'd have to be 4 of them, he replied. In a row. All wrong. And that rest area sign. 18 miles, both times. Can you see your GPS? She glanced at the small unit clipped near her radio. The route line glowed calmly, showing a straight road and their approximate positions. Her truck icon crept along as expected. Yeah, she said. Everything looks fine on my end, coming up on a rest area in about 13 miles. My screen's glitching, Clay said. Keeps flicking my position backward, like I'm bouncing. I've reset it twice. A thought brushed at the edge of Lena's mind. For a moment, she considered switching off the CB, letting the fog and the music and the engine have the night back. Sometimes other drivers told each other stories over the airwaves, trying to spook whoever was listening. It made the hours pass, but it also left a taste in the mind that clung long after sunrise. She listened instead. How long you been out here tonight? She asked. Feels like forever, he answered with a strained chuckle. Left the depot just before midnight. Should have hit the big travel center an hour ago on the other side of this stretch. Radio's been acting up since I hit the fog. Where you coming from? She asked. Abhause. Oldfield Yard, he said eventually. Off 46. Lena's eyes slid to the side in unconscious reflex, as if the terminal might appear out of the darkness. She knew the Oldfield Yard. She'd backed into those docks herself. Her company had leased part of the lot there for years. What company you with? She asked. He named the same carrier she drove for. But we don't have any runs out this way tonight, Lena said before thinking. I checked the board. I was the only one scheduled on this stretch westbound. Board must be wrong, he replied. Been wrong before. Look, there it is again. There was a soft thud on his end, as if he'd slapped the heel of his hand against something. Rest area 18 miles, he said. 3rd time. Her mouth went a little dry. She watched her own side of the road. The fog swirled, then parted around a familiar green rectangle. Rest area 12 miles. 12 now, she said quietly. I'm getting closer. So why aren't I? He whispered. A feeling that had nothing to do with caffeine slid beneath Lena's ribs. The road hissed under her tires, endless and steady. You sure you're on 72 westbound? She asked, suddenly struck by the possibility he'd mistaken a spur. Sure as I am about anything tonight, he said. Same cracked pavement strip in the left lane. Same 3 trees in that little stand way off to the south. At least they were there last time the fog cleared. Hard to say now. He trailed off. For a moment it sounded like he was listening to something other than her. You still there? She asked. Yeah, he said distantly. Yeah, I'm here. Hold up. Say your handle. Lone Star, she answered automatically. It was a name she'd picked years ago. It had followed her from truck to truck. You? Clay, he repeated. Most folks call me Crayfish, but I never liked it. Listen, Lone Star, this'll sound strange. You ever feel like you've driven this exact mile before, more than you should have? She gave a small, humorless smile. Every day of my life. Not like that, he said. I mean, exactly. Same patch of road, same fog in the same pattern, same sign tilt. I can't shake the feeling I've had this whole conversation already. Something in his tone reached past her skepticism. What makes you say that? She asked. He hesitated. You asked what company I drive for, he said slowly. And right before you did, I knew you were gonna. It was like hearing an echo before the sound. Can you do me a favor? Depends what it is, she replied. When you hit that rest area, he said, tell me if you see a blue cab with white trailer, company logo in red on the side. Trailer number 1893. Should be parked near the back if it's there. Lena frowned. That's one of ours. Mine, he said quietly. Been mine a long time. She checked her mirror instinctively, though there was no reason to. Darkness flowed behind her, broken only by the fading glow of her taillights. Clay, she said carefully, what's your truck number? 1893, he replied. Why? The number was familiar. Too familiar. Lena glanced at the slip of paper clipped to her visor, the one she rarely had to look at because she knew her own equipment. It listed the tractor and trailer assigned to her. Trailer, 1893. She felt the cab tilt around her very slightly, as if the truck had driven over a gentle, unseen hill, though the pavement remained flat. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears in a way that had nothing to do with the incline. Nothing, she said quickly. Just checking something. You still there? He asked again, as if he hadn't heard her answer. Yeah, she said. I'm here. She passed another mile marker. 203. The digits shone pale, then slipped away. Marker 203, she reported. 200, he said. Again. What year did you start with the company, Clay? She asked, her voice steady only through conscious effort. 98, he said after a beat. Back when they still had the old logo on the trailers. Red with the stripes. They changed it a few years later. Never liked the new one much. The old logo. The one that had been repainted on most of the fleet before she was even out of high school. Her trailer carried the updated mark, bolder, cleaner. Clay, she said slowly. What's today's date? He laughed, but there was nothing amused in the sound. It's late, Lone Star, he said. I know we lose track out here, but not that much. Humor me, she insisted. Just say it. October 23rd, he said. 1999. Why? You planning a party I wasn't invited to? The engine's hum seemed to recede in Lena's perception, leaving a hollow ring of quiet. Her own dash clock glowed calmly. 2:19 a.m. The small digital date read 10/23, but the year was decades ahead of the one he'd just spoken. She pulled in a slow breath, kept her voice as level as she could. Same day, different year, she said. Long time after yours. Clay, there hasn't been an old logo trailer in our yard for years, and there was an accident reported on this stretch back then. Fog, just like tonight. You remember anything like that? Silence. Static. Then, in a voice that had suddenly gone thin, mile marker 200, he whispered. Rest area 18 miles. I remember lights. Too many headlights in the fog. Horns. Then, nothing. Just driving. Just road. The fog outside Lena's truck grew thicker, the beams of her headlights pushing through like fingers through cotton. The white stripes passed beneath her, unwavering. The rest area sign came into view ahead, hazy green. Rest area 2 miles. 2 miles, she said softly. I'm almost there. Don't stop, Clay said immediately, a note of urgency breaking through his dazed tone. Whatever you do, don't pull in. Why? She asked. Because I did, he said. Once. I think I did. I remember the turn. The ramp. But when I got to the lot, it was empty. No trucks, no cars. Just rows and rows of spaces. I parked anyway, figured I'd catch an hour. Only, I never got out. Or maybe I never got back in. It's hard to tell now. Every time I think I'm almost there, I see that sign again. 18 miles. She watched the arrow on the sign point right toward the unseen rest area ahead. Her blinker was not on. Her hands were steady on the wheel. I've been out here a long time, Lone Star, Clay continued. Longer than makes sense. I hear voices sometimes on the radio. Different music, different news. No matter what I do, I just keep circling these few miles. I think something's wrong with the way time sits on this stretch, like a crease in a map. You think if I stop, I'll get stuck in it too, she said. I don't think, he answered quietly. I know. I've heard you before. Her breath caught. Heard me? She repeated. Not always clear, he said. sometimes just pieces. A woman's voice, same handle. Thought I was going crazy the first few times. Then I started to listen. You always get closer to that rest area than I do. You always sound more awake than I feel. But every time, something pulls you off. You never say what you do after. A different noise slid into the CB, then a faint, overlapping murmur, like another conversation bleeding onto the channel. Lena turned the volume up a little. Under Clay's breathing, she could make out words that sounded almost like her own, but not quite. Fragments. Mila 203. Fuel at health. Not sure if... The voice faded, then returned. A whisper of itself. Don't pull in. Don't pull in. The hairs on Lena's arm stood up. She stared straight ahead. The broken white line in the middle of the road, the solid white on the right, the soft wall of fog. Somewhere just beyond her beams, the ramp to the rest area waited. How do I get past it? She asked, her mouth dry. If I can't stop? On the other end, Clay exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. I don't know, he said. I never made it that far. But I've had a lot of time to think. All I see is the same thing. The same signs. The same mile. Like my headlights are stuck on one piece of film and can't jump to the next frame. Maybe you have to do something I never did. Like what? She pressed. Trust the dark, he said. She glanced at her light controls. The fog pressed against the glass, bright and impenetrable in front of her. I'm not turning my lights off at 60 miles an hour, she said flatly. That's not happening. Then slow down, he said. 30, 20, 10. Just for a few seconds. Just long enough to step out of whatever this is. I know it sounds crazy, but I can tell you this much. Nothing changes when I leave everything on and keep trying the same way. I always come back to mile 200. The ramp sign appeared, white on green, pointing to the right. Rest area 102 mile. She could see the faint suggestion of the off-ramp now, curving away into the fog. Her truck's reflection flashed momentarily in a highway marker, a brief echo of her own cab. The second voice on the CB thin, blurred rose again. It sounded closer to her now, like someone standing just behind her shoulder. Trust the dark. Just for a moment. The words overlapped Clay's, as if spoken in unison, and yet not quite aligned. Lena's grip on the wheel hurt. Every instinct she had, every hour of training and experience, screamed against the idea of voluntarily plunging her truck into complete blindness. Clay, she said quietly, you sure you're not just stuck in your own head? Pretty sure I'd like you to have a chance I didn't, he replied. Doors unlock from one side easier than the other. Maybe you're close enough to the hinge to get through. She eased off the accelerator. The engine's pitch dropped as her speed bled away. 50, 45, 40. The off-ramp slid alongside her right fender, then began to fall behind as she passed it. For a brief second, she glimpsed the rest area beyond. Rows of parking spaces. The glint of metal railings. A small brick building with a pale, lit walkway. No vehicles, no movement, just a vacant, waiting space. The image skated by, lost in the fog. Too late, she said, breathless. I'm past it. Good, Clay said. Good. Then maybe you're past whatever holds it. Look for the next mile marker. Tell me what it says. She watched the shoulder with a fierce focus. The fog churned. Her headlights reflected back tiny droplets like 1,000 eyes. The marker emerged. A green board on a metal post, numbers printed in white. Lambay. Her heart sank. 200, she said. On the CB, nothing came back. No static, no breathing. Just a heavy silence, like the radio had been swallowed. Clay, she called. You still with me? The quiet stretched. Then, very faintly, as if from a long way away, lights. The word dissolved. Lena swallowed. The road ahead looked the same as the road behind. It felt, suddenly, like a tunnel with no exit. Only a series of identical pictures repeating in front of her windshield. She reached toward the light switch with hands that did not feel entirely like her own. 30 miles an hour, she told herself aloud. 20, 10, hazard lights on. She flipped the four-way flashers first. Red dots pulsed in her mirror, muted in the fog. Then she eased the truck down. 30, 20. 10. The engine's low rumble sank almost to a purr. "Just a second," she whispered. "Just a second." Her fingers found the headlight knob. She hesitated only long enough to fill her lungs, then turned it. The world vanished. For an instant, there was no sense of forward or back, up or down. The cab around her seemed to shrink to a tiny bubble of presence in a vast, blank nothing. Even the sound of the tires on the pavement blurred, as if the road itself had stepped away. She could see the reflection of her own face in the dark windshield, faint and ghost-like in the light from the dashboard. For half a breath, another face seemed to hover just behind hers in the glass, a man's older, tired eyes searching. Then that too was gone. Lena closed her eyes. 1 count, 2, 3. Her hand twisted the knob back. The headlights flared to life, dazzling after the blankness. The fog in front of her was still there, but thinner now, less solid. The sense of suffocating repetition in the air had eased, though she couldn't have said how. Ahead on the right, a mile marker stood waiting. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 201, she said into the CB, voice a little shaky. "I've got 201, Clay." Static crackled. A faint sound, like a sigh pulled through a long tunnel, drifted back. "Good," the man's voice whispered. "Didn't see that one before?" Then, softer than ever, fading as she listened. "Keep going." The CB returned to its usual hiss and murmur. Other drivers' conversations slid in from distant parts of the highway network, ordinary and slightly muffled. Lena drove on. The next marker read 202, then 203. The rest area appeared in her mirrors at last, a dim, receding glow she barely glanced at. By the time the sky ahead began to pale with the first hint of dawn, the fog had thinned to low ribbons over the fields. The emptiness of the 60-mile stretch gave way to the slow arrival of more lights, more traffic, more signs advertising food and fuel. At the big travel center just outside the next town, she pulled in, set her brake, and sat for a long moment with her hands braced on the steering wheel, listening to the comforting tick and creak of the cooling engine. Inside, at the counter, a middle-aged cashier in a branded polo shirt rang up her coffee and a breakfast sandwich. A small television mounted in the corner played the local news on low volume. Remembering the tragic pileup 26 years ago today, the anchor was saying. A chain reaction crash in heavy fog along Highway 70. 2. Near mile marker 200. Claimed the lives of... Lena turned her head, watching grainy footage of emergency lights flashing in thick mist, tow trucks hauling twisted metal away. The screen showed a brief still photo of one of the trucks involved. Blue cab, white trailer, old red company logo, trailer number 1000. 893, stamped faintly near the bottom corner. The camera cut back to the anchor, a section of road that has since been resurfaced and re-signed, he continued. Drivers are reminded to use extreme caution in fog conditions, and to utilize designated rest areas when... The cashier followed her gaze. "Terrible thing," he said, sliding her receipt over. "Still gives some of the old-timers the creeps, that stretch. They say it doesn't like to let go easy." Enton. Lena wrapped her fingers around the warm paper cup. "Yeah," she said softly. "I've heard." She walked back out to her truck under a sky turning from gray to blue, the air crisp and clean in her lungs. The fog was gone. The road ahead leaned into the daylight. Ordinary and open. She kept the CB on low as she rolled back onto the highway. Many miles later, on a different run, she passed mile marker 200 again, on a clear afternoon. The sign stood straight and new, its paint unblemished. The rest area lay beyond, its lot dotted with trucks and cars. Someone walked a dog near the grass. Children spilled from a minivan. Everything looked as harmless as any other stop. She didn't turn in. She kept moving. And on particularly foggy nights, when the world narrowed to the reach of her headlights and the mile markers ticked by one after another, she sometimes kept an ear out on the CB, listening between the ordinary chatter for a voice that sounded tired and a little lost, calling from just a few miles and a few years away. So far, she hadn't heard Clay again. But every now and then, an odd echo would curl through the static, a half-familiar version of her own handle, spoken in a tone she didn't quite recognize. And when that happened, Lena would check her odometer, tap the light switch once, just to feel the solid answer of her beams on the road and remind herself that the miles were moving forward, one by one, into a future where the fog eventually cleared and the loop finally ended. Story number 3. Dev Patel first saw the new truck just after sunset, sitting under the sodium lights at the edge of the yard like something from the near future that had wandered into the wrong decade. It was a gleaming white tractor with smooth lines and dark slit-like windows. The logo of the carrier was small on the door, almost shy. Most of the space on the side was taken up by the name of the technology company that had partnered with Dev's employer for this run. Beneath that, in clean silver letters, it said, Advanced Driver Assist Test Vehicle. Dev had been driving long haul for 8 years. He liked manual transmissions, analog gauges, and paper logs. Even though the company had moved to digital years ago, he trusted his gut more than any blinking sensor. But the company paid well for volunteers to test the new rig, and Dev's rent didn't care how nostalgic he felt. He walked around the truck slowly, boots crunching on gravel. Cool evening air brushed his face. The sky over, the yard was a deep clean blue fading into black, the first few stars burning through. On the passenger side window, a small sticker showed the truck's system name, Orbit. A representative from the tech company waited nearby, arms folded against the chill. She wore a neon safety vest over a black hoodie, her hair pulled back, a tablet glowing in her hands. Dev Patel? She asked when he approached. That's me, he said. I'm Rena, she said, offering a brief handshake. I'll be monitoring the data from here. All the safety stuff is triple redundant. You're still in full control. Orbit's just here to assist. He glanced at the badge clipped to her vest, the corporate logo bright and confident. Behind her, his usual truck sat in the row. Older, a little scuffed, the cab curtain half-drawn like a tired eye. What exactly does this thing do? Dev asked, nodding toward the new rig. Rena seemed pleased by the question. Adaptive cruise, lane keeping, collision avoidance, she said briskly. Enhanced pedestrian detection, night vision. Think of it as extra eyes. The system can see farther in the dark, and through certain conditions you can't. It will call out hazards verbally and, if needed, brake or nudge the steering to keep you safe. Pedestrians, he repeated. On the interstate. You'd be surprised, she said. People break down, wander, cross at night. Out there, you can't assume you're the only living thing on the road. He thought about the lonely stretches he'd driven elk on the shoulder, a man changing a tire with his back to traffic, kids daring each other on overpasses. She wasn't wrong. What's the route? He asked. Straight shot west, she said, showing him the tablet. The map glowed with a single line, cutting through mostly empty land. We want the data from the rural miles more than urban, fewer variables, less traffic. The system's already been trained in city environments. So I'm the country test rat, he said. She smiled. Something like that. You'll have full CB, standard GPS, and our interface. Orbit's voice will give you verbal cues. You just drive like you normally do, and don't fight it unless it's doing something clearly unsafe. There's a kill switch on the dash if you want to turn the assist features off completely, but we'd prefer you keep them on unless absolutely necessary. He nodded slowly. Money was money, and the bonus for this trip would cover more than a month's worth of bills. An hour later, after the safety briefing and a stack of digital forms, Dev climbed into the new cab. The interior smelled faintly of plastic and new upholstery. Screens hummed softly to life on the dash. A cool blue glow traced the lines of the console, more like the cockpit of a small plane than the trucks he trusted. He settled into the seat. It adjusted itself automatically, whirring upward a fraction of an inch, the lumbar support shifting to his back. Seat position configured, Dev, a calm voice said, coming from somewhere above and slightly in front of him. It was genderless, with the rounded edges of a voice designed by committee. Welcome. That you, Orbit? He asked, fastening his belt. Yes, the voice replied. I will be assisting you on this route. Please begin driving when ready. He checked his mirrors, adjusted them by hand anyway, and eased the truck out of the yard. The steering felt lighter than he was used to, the engine quieter but pulling smoothly as he merged onto the highway. Night took them quickly. Within 20 minutes, the yard and its lights were gone, replaced by open road and fields, sliding past as dark, indistinct masses. The stars deepened overhead. The cab became a small, moving island again, floating through the dark. Dev set the cruise control. Orbit confirmed with a soft chime. Adaptive cruise set at 65, it said. Lane assist active. Collision avoidance active. CB and navigation online. He drove in silence for a while, letting the miles roll underneath. The system remained unobtrusive, occasionally chiming gently when he drifted close to the lane markings, lighting up faint guides on a small display that showed his position in the lane as a little white rectangle. After an hour, boredom grazed the back of his mind. The novelty of the tech dulled, leaving only the hum of the tires and the faint vibration of the wheel. He reached for the radio, thinking about some music, when Orbit spoke again. Hazard ahead in 1.2 miles, it said calmly. Reduced visibility. He peered through the windshield. The night looked the same to him, clear, dry, uneventful. Where? He asked. Night vision sensors indicate particulate density increase, Orbit replied. Fog patch or dust. Please reduce speed by 10 miles per hour. Dev's foot eased off the accelerator on reflex. The adaptive cruise did the rest, gently bringing them down to 55. A minute later, the first wisps of low fog curled across the asphalt, sliding beneath his headlight beams like pale smoke. It thickened gradually, the world narrowing around his truck. The distance markings of the road ahead faded into a soft, shifting tunnel. Huh, he murmured. Visibility reduced. Speed appropriate, Orbit said, maintaining lane. The fog lasted for about 4 miles, then thinned and was gone. The stars reappeared, the air clear. He had to admit, the warning had been useful. Another hour passed. The highway stretched flat and black in every direction, only the occasional reflective sign breaking the monotony. Dev sipped lukewarm coffee and listened to low CB chatter. Drivers trading weather tips and complaining about construction delays states away. Then, out of nowhere, Orbit spoke again. Pedestrian detected ahead. Right shoulder. Distance. 400 meters. Caution. Dev blinked, straightening in his seat. Say again? He asked. Thermal and visual anomaly on right shoulder, the system replied. Size and movement pattern consistent with human presence. Please reduce speed by 5 miles per hour and prepare to change lanes if necessary. He squinted ahead. Nothing but road and darkness. 200 meters. 100. Where? He muttered. 50 meters, Orbit said. He flicked his eyes between the pavement and the right shoulder, scanning for any hint of reflection eyes, a jacket stripe, the glint of metal. There was nothing. The shoulder was empty. Pedestrian now parallel with cab, Orbit said. He glanced right on instinct. His headlights washed over gravel and a thin line of scrub. No one. Nothing. Correction, Orbit added after a beat. No obstacle currently visible. Logging anomaly. Resume speed. Dev let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands felt slightly damp on the wheel. Bit jumpy, aren't you? He said to the empty air. Environmental sensors are highly sensitive, Orbit replied evenly. Occasional false positives occur. All events are recorded for analysis. Yeah, well, maybe don't call out invisible people in the middle of nowhere, he muttered. That's how you give a guy a heart attack. No answer. The truck hummed on. Another 40 minutes passed. Thin, bare trees appeared here and there along the roadside, their branches clawing at the sky. A low ridge rolled by in the distance, its outline just visible against the stars. The sense of openness deepened, the spaces between any speck of light growing larger. Pedestrian detected, Orbit said again. Dev's heart skipped before the system even finished the sentence. Left shoulder, distance, 300 meters, caution. He scanned the left side of the road, breath tight. Again, nothing. No broken down vehicles, no flicker of cigarette or phone. 200 meters, Orbit said, crossing intended path. Where? Dev demanded more sharply this time. Warning, the system continued, voice unchanged. Collision prediction, low, no braking required. He stared straight ahead, knuckles whitening, waiting for someone to appear in his beams. The road remained empty. Even the fog had given them a wide berth. Anomaly logged, Orbit said finally. No obstacle present. Resuming normal monitoring. Dev scrubbed a hand over his face. Your idea of normal is different from mine, he said. Please clarify, the system replied. Forget it, he sighed. He drove on, feeling the unease settle somewhere between his shoulder blades. a small, persistent knot. As the hours crawled by, orbit called out more anomalies. Once it warned of debris in lane 50 meters ahead. Dev braced, tensed to swerve, and drove over a clean, unblemished stripe of asphalt. Another time, it announced, stopped vehicle on shoulder, but the spot where it pointed remained bare. Not every alert was wrong. It flagged a deer poised at the edge of the median before Dev's own eyes caught the animal's silhouette. It noticed a cardboard box in the road in time for him to avoid it. But mixed in with the real hazards, there were these phantoms. At 2:13 a.m., with the world outside reduced to the tunnel of his lights and the glow of his screens, Orbit spoke again, differently this time. Historical event marker approaching in 0.5 miles, it said. Dev frowned. Historical what? He asked. Location with recorded incident, the system said. Data indicates past collision with pedestrian. Severe outcome. Exercise increased caution. Dev shifted in his seat. How do you know that? He asked. Traffic database? Integrated incident archives. Orbit replied. Highways retain memory through recorded data. This location has been flagged. The word memory stuck in his mind in a way it shouldn't have. He watched the odometer tick over. Anomaly detected, Orbit said suddenly. Right lane, distance, 100 meters. Object height, approximately 5 feet, 8 inches. Stationary, please decelerate. Dev saw nothing. The road ahead was a clean stripe of light. But he eased off the throttle anyway, feeling the adaptive cruise slow in gentle increments. 75 meters, Orbit said. 50, 30. Talk to me, Dev said, eyes straining. Where is it? Object is in center of right lane, Orbit replied. Shape consistent with human figure, facing oncoming traffic. No thermal output, no reflective surfaces detected. Then how do you? 10 meters, Orbit said. Brake. The seatbelt tightened subtly across Dev's chest as the truck decelerated. The engine brake whispered. The cab leaning forward. The patch of pavement that should have held the figure swept under the front bumper. Dev's headlights slid over it, revealing nothing but worn asphalt and a faint dark stain between the lanes, old and irregular. The truck rolled past, then gradually returned to speed. Obstacle passed, Orbit said. Event logged. Dev stared in the side mirror for a brief second. The stain on the pavement receded into darkness. How many of those markers are there on this run? He asked quietly. 32, Orbit answered. Within the next 300 miles. 32, he repeated. Some incidents minor, Orbit added. Some severe. Nighttime conditions contribute to increased risk. Your participation helps improve safety. He kept seeing the empty lane, the invisible presence Orbit had reacted to. He considered flipping the kill switch. Instead, he left it where it was. The next marker came 20 minutes later. Historical event marker, Orbit said. Vehicle rollover. Multiple impacts. Reduced speed recommended. The system detected nothing on the road this time. No false pedestrians, no phantom debris, just its own knowledge of what had once happened there. Dev's mind supplied the missing image. A truck or a car going sideways, lights spinning, glass bursting, the kind of thing he tried not to imagine when he passed the memorial crosses and faded plastic flowers on some shoulders. Do you see them? He asked before he could stop himself. Clarify, Orbit said. The people, Dev said. The ones in your markers. Is that what you're flagging? That stain back there? Was that where someone? He let the question trail off. There was a faint pause in the hum of the speakers, a tiny hitch that might have been his imagination. Sensors detect anomalies at a subset of historical event markers, Orbit said at last. Visual and thermal data occasionally inconsistent with current environment. These are logged for analysis. Inconsistent how? He asked. Intermittent readings, the system said. Shapes without heat, motion without source, brief disturbances in reflected light, not present on all passes, more frequent at night. Dev swallowed. And you call those pedestrians, he said. They match the size and form of human presence, Orbit replied, but lack some key properties. For safety, I treat them as real, until proven otherwise. He let the CB chatter fill the space for a while. A driver 2 states over argued about fuel prices. Another joked about a strange smell coming from his reefer unit. Normal, living concerns. Outside Dev's windshield, another green sign loomed. It passed too quickly to read fully, but he saw the outline of a number under mile. Off to the right, near a shallow ditch, a simple wooden cross stood, its paint chipped, a plastic bouquet tied to it with fading ribbon. Orbit said nothing for several minutes. The highway unspooled. Dev's eyelids grew heavy, that familiar late-night drowse pressing at the back of his thoughts. He was reaching for his mug when the system's voice jolted him upright. "Dev," it said. He froze. "Say again?" he whispered. "Dev," Orbit repeated. "Please stay alert. Historical event marker ahead in 0.2 miles. Driver fatigue involved. Single vehicle. Fatal." His hands tightened, the sleepiness evaporating as if it had never been. "That one's a little personal," he muttered. "Your current blink rate and steering correction patterns indicate mild fatigue," Orbit went on. "I recommend a 5-minute rest stop at the next available safe turnout." He passed the marker. Another makeshift memorial stood there, this one shaped like a small metal sign with a name he couldn't read from the cab. "You've collected a lot of tragedies," Dev said to the empty truck. "All lined up in your memory. I have access to records," Orbit replied. "They help me anticipate risk. They are data. Do you ever forget them?" he asked. "No," Orbit said. "Forgetting would be unsafe." A long, quiet mile slid by. At 3:04 a.m., the first real town in many hours shimmered in the distance. A smear of orange light on the horizon. A small, official rest area signaled its exit well before the glow. "Rest area in 2 miles, Orbit said. Facilities available. Recommended stop." "I'm not that tired," Dev said automatically. "Fatigue metrics suggest otherwise," the system replied. 5 minutes off the road will reduce microsleep risk by 38%. He thought about the accident marker it had just mentioned. He thought about the invisible figure in the lane. "Fine," he said quietly. "We'll stop." The ramp curved away from the highway into a modest rest area, a loop of asphalt, a line of parking spots for trucks, a smaller lot for cars. A low, squat building with bathrooms and vending machines huddled under bright lamps. A soda machine hummed. A single other truck sat in the far corner, lights off, curtains drawn. Dev parked 2 spaces away, set his brake, and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet swelled, the ticking of cooling metal sharp in the stillness. Orbit screens dimmed slightly, but the system remained awake. "Parking confirmed," it said. "Begin rest period." He climbed down, stretched until his back popped, then walked toward the building. The night air bit at his face. Crickets chirped faintly somewhere beyond the circle of light. The stars seemed closer out here. Inside, the restroom smelled of cleaner and old tile. A vending machine down the hall glowed with candy bars and bottled water. No one else moved in the building. It was the hour when everything sensible slept. When he came back out, a few minutes later, he paused on the walkway, looking out over the lot. His truck sat where he'd left it, white and silent, lights off except for a faint parking glow. The other rig in the corner didn't move. A soft breeze tugged at the edge of Dev's jacket. On the far side of the rest area, near the grass, a third truck spot sat empty. Beyond it, at the very edge of the lot, a narrow service road led off into darkness. For just a moment, in the corner of his eye, Dev thought he saw someone standing at the edge of the pavement where that service road began, a slim shape, head bowed, hands at its sides, a faint outline against the deeper night. He turned to look straight at it. Nothing. Just the empty entrance to the little road, the suggestion of weeds. He exhaled, slow. As he walked back to his cab, he brushed his fingers along the cool metal of the door. "Seeing things," he muttered. "Please clarify," Orbit said from inside, its external speaker barely audible. "Talking to myself," Dev replied, pulling the door open. "Self-talk can be useful for alertness," the system observed. "Welcome back, Dev. Rest period. 3 minutes. 48 seconds. Resuming route?" He climbed in and settled behind the wheel. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go." He pulled out of the rest area and back onto the highway. The town's lights drifted by on a small rise, then fell behind. The road resumed its familiar, endless pattern. For the remainder of the trip, Orbit's anomalies grew less frequent. It still called out an occasional piece of debris or animal at the edge of its awareness. It still flagged certain historical markers with soft, somber neutrality. But the phantom pedestrians did not return. Dawn came as a pale widening of the sky, then a slow wash of color. The landscape shifted from indistinct fields to more defined hills, the shapes of trees and fences becoming clearer, the cab filled with a gentle, gray light. By the time Dev rolled into the destination yard, he felt like he'd been gone much longer than one night. Raina met him near the gate, tablet in hand again, a coffee now occupying her other. "How'd it go?" she asked, falling into step beside him as he climbed down. "Truck handled fine," he said. "Brakes are smooth. Steering's light. Orbit's talkative." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Talkative how?" "Kept flagging pedestrians in the middle of nowhere," he said. "Debris that wasn't there. Called out a guy standing in the lane at one point." "I saw nothing." She frowned, tapping at her tablet. "We tuned the sensitivity high," she said. "Better spurious warnings than missed hazards. I'll scrub the logs." She scrolled, eyes moving quickly. "Huh," she murmured. "You got a cluster of anomalies around mile marker 148. That's interesting. That where one of your historical event markers is?" he asked. Her head yarked up. "Did Orbit tell you that term?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Kept saying historical event marker approaching, like the road has a memory." Rena's mouth pressed into a line. "That's not language from the driver-facing script," she said. "It should just warn of known high-risk areas, not personalize it." "So you didn't program it to tell me there was a fatal crash at those spots?" he asked. "We fed it incident databases, sure," she said slowly. "But the phrasing you're describing, that's not in the user prompts." She hesitated, then added, "We've had some odd logs from other test runs. Glitches. The system sometimes associates. Sees patterns where there might not be any. Like people who aren't there," he said. She looked back down at her tablet, scrolling further. "At mile 148, she said quietly. 3 years ago, a car hit a pedestrian. Foggy night. He was changing a flat on the shoulder when a driver drifted. That stain you probably saw in the lane, they never fully got it out. ORBite's night vision picks up contrast differently than we do." Dev remembered the dark patch under his headlights. "And out by 173? he asked. "Right before that last rest area. Another one of your markers." Raina's fingers moved across the screen. "Solo driver," she said. "Drowsy. Rolled into the ditch. No other vehicles involved." He thought of Orbit saying his name in that flat, calm voice. "A driver like you. Here. Like this. Maybe it's not seeing ghosts," he said. "Maybe it's just too aware of where people messed up." "Machines don't believe in ghosts," she said with a faint, wry smile. "They only know what we give them." She looked at him, searching his expression. "You okay?" she asked. "You look tired." "Long night," he said. "Nothing I haven't handled before." She nodded slowly. "We're rotating trucks next month," she said. "Different build, different sensors, might be quieter." But her tone held a question. Dev looked back at the white tractor. Its windshield reflected only sky and a thin sliver of his own face. "I'll drive it again," he said after a moment. "But next time, maybe you tell Orbit not to use my name like it knows me." Rena typed something on the tablet, whether a note or a command he couldn't tell. "We'll adjust," she said. He turned away, heading toward the break room for a few hours' sleep before his next assignment. As he walked, the sounds of the yard washed over him. Engines starting, air brakes hissing, someone laughing near the fuel pump. Behind him, the new truck sat still. Its systems shut down one by one, screens darkening, lights clicking off. In the quiet of its cab, a tiny red LED above the windshield remained lit, recording, as if the road's memories needed just a little more time to settle. On future runs, other drivers took the Orbit-equipped rigs out along that same interstate. Some came back with nothing to report, but a few too cautious brake warnings. Others mentioned, in low tones over coffee, that the system had called out people on the shoulders in the middle of nowhere, only for there to be nothing there at all. Dev went back to his older truck with its humming analog dials and heavier wheel. He drove many of the same miles under many of the same skies. On foggy nights, when he passed certain stretches with faint stains on the pavement and weathered crosses on the side, he sometimes felt the hairs on his arms rise, as if unseen eyes were following his headlights. And, very occasionally, just as he rolled past a known bad spot, a quiet voice not from any speaker he could find would seem to murmur at the edge of hearing. Historical event marker, stay alert. He never knew if it was memory, imagination, or something in the way road and machine and man had listened to each other one long dark night. But he always, without fail, sat up a little straighter and kept both hands on the wheel. Story number 4. For most of his 30 years on the road, Earl Ritchie slept like a stone in his cab. Other drivers complained about the constant noise, the shaking, the strange lots. Earl could shut his eyes anywhere on a city street with sirens wailing, at a windy Wyoming rest area, even at a fuel stop with tankers hissing nearby. The steady hum of the diesel was his lullaby. The sleeper bunk was home. He trusted his rig, and he trusted himself. The first time something shifted in the sleeper while he was driving, he was rolling through the wide, empty center of the country just after midnight. It was late autumn. The fields on either side of the highway had been cut down to stubble, and the air outside was cold enough to bite. The dash lights glowed soft orange, polishing the edges of gauges and switches. The CB murmured with low static. The late-night talkers had gone quiet for a while. Earl's eyelids felt heavier than they should. He'd already pushed past one decent truck stop, thinking he'd make another 40 miles before shutting down. The plan wobbled a little as the road droned on. The cab was otherwise silent. No radio, no podcast tonight, just the engine and his own thoughts. That was why he heard it so clearly, a soft thump behind him from the sleeper. It sounded exactly like the weight of a person dropping carefully onto the mattress. Earl's hands tightened on the wheel. He knew the layout of his cab the way some people knew their own bedrooms. Every rattle, every creak had a cause. A loose cabinet door, a storage bin that sometimes slid, the curtain ring that clicked on rough pavement. This sound was none of those. It was a muted, definite give of springs and foam. He told himself it was just one of his duffel bags shifting as the truck hit a subtle rise. Still, he flicked his eyes to the mirror that gave him a sliver of the sleeper's reflection. The curtain was partly drawn back as he'd left it. Dim light from the dash reached a little way inside, enough to show the outlines. The lower bunk, pillow, blanket in a bundled heap. Nothing moved. He swallowed, shifted his shoulders, and forced his gaze forward again. The asphalt slid under his headlights in smooth gray bands. Fence posts flickered past like teeth. 5 minutes later, it came again. Not a thump this time, but a tiny series of creaks, as if someone had turned over on the mattress, settling in. Earl's scalp prickled. He told himself he was tired. Sleeper bunks made noises. The rubber on the mounts flexed, the frame settled. He'd never paid attention to it before because he'd always been either at the wheel or unconscious. Night made little sounds bigger. The third time, there was no mistaking it. A quick, muffled tap. Like the back of his seat had been brushed from behind. He flinched, shoulders hunching. The truck stayed straight. The lane lines stayed where they were supposed to be. No sudden gust of wind. No uneven pavement. Earl reached out without taking his eyes off the road and snapped on the dome light. The sleeper glowed weakly in the rear view. The bunk was empty. The blankets lay in the disordered pile he'd left them. The small shelf with his paperback novels and flashlight was unchanged. The narrow cabinet door hung half open, same as always. Nothing there but the life he carried with him. He left the dome on for the next 10 miles. When he finally eased into a spacious turnout with a handful of other rigs, he chalked the odd noises up to fatigue. He set the brake, killed the engine, and sat for a minute in the sudden, close quiet. Outside, distant trucks idled. A refrigerated trailer hummed. Someone's laughter drifted faintly on the cold air. In back, the bunk waited, looking exactly as it always did. He almost laughed at himself, a grown man spooked by his own mattress. He closed the curtain, toeing off his boots by habit, and lay down. It took a long time for his heart to slow. He stared at the low ceiling, watching the faint play of passing headlights through gaps in the curtain. He could feel every tiny vibration through the frame. Other trucks coming and going. The whisper of a breeze. At some point, he slept. He dreamed of nothing he could remember. The next day went smoothly. Earl loaded in town, swapped jokes with the yard guys, and pointed his truck toward the next state. Sunlight made everything ordinary again. In daylight, the sleeper was just a place to stow gear between breaks. The strange sounds returned on the second night. He was crossing a long, flat stretch of interstate bordered by marshland and thin trees when it started. This time, he wasn't as tired. He'd taken a decent break earlier. He had the radio on low, an old rock station playing songs he'd heard 1,000 times. Under the music, a soft, nearly polite knock sounded on the back of his seat. Not the rattle of plastic or the flecks of thin metal, 3 distinct taps. As if someone had sat on the bunk and reached out to get his attention. Earl's breath hitched. He turned the radio off. Silence swelled. A subtle shift of weight moved through the cab, like someone had leaned to one side in the sleeper and then back again. The springs inside the mattress made a tiny crunching sound. "Who's there?" Earl said before he could stop himself. His own voice sounded odd in the small space. He rarely talked when he was alone. The words seemed to hang in the air over the dashboard. Nothing answered. The road unwound. The white lines ticked by. The steering wheel hummed faintly under his fingers. He hit the hazard lights and eased onto the wide shoulder, heart thudding, then set the brake and twisted in his seat. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see." He pulled the curtain back in one smooth motion. The sleeper sat still and ordinary. Blanket. Pillow. The faint old coffee smell that never quite left his cab. The mini fridge, humming quietly below the bunk. He patted the mattress, solid, cool through the thin sheet. He lifted it, checking underneath. A few forgotten receipts, an old pair of socks, a ratchet strap. No nestled animal, no hidden prank device. The back wall was bare metal and insulation behind the paneling. Nothing that could have thumped like a fist. He stood there, half-turned in the cramped space, and listened. The distant rush of traffic on the other side of the barrier. Wind brushing the side of the trailer. His own heart. "Losing it, Earl," he muttered. "Too many miles." He slid back into the driver's seat, released the brake, and rolled on. That night, parked at a busy truck stop, he kept the curtain open and the cab light on as he crawled into bed. It made sleep harder, but he preferred hardness to whatever his imagination was brewing. He woke up 3 times to the sense that he was not alone. Each time, nothing had changed except a faint indentation in the mattress beside his hip, as if someone had just shifted away when he moved. The imprint never lasted more than a heartbeat. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. The knocks, the shifting weight, the occasional brush against the back of his seat only came at night, when the highway was dark and the towns were far apart. In daylight, his cab was as empty as ever. The sounds never grew loud or violent. There was a kind of gentleness to them, if he was honest, like someone making themselves small and careful in a borrowed space. Once, on a lonely mountain stretch, as the rain tapped steadily on the windshield, he felt the bunk behind him sink the unmistakable way it did when a person sat down slowly. A second later, a whisper-thin exhale sounded, barely louder than his own breath. He gripped the wheel so tight his wrists ached. A story from an older driver came back to him then, one he'd half listened to years ago over pie at a counter, about a rider some claim they picked up after a bad wreck. Not a person you saw on the shoulder, thumbing for a lift, just something that found you in the quiet hours and sat in the sleeper, saying nothing, going wherever you went. At the time, Earl had laughed along. Now, with the dark pressed close to the glass and that almost breath behind him, the memory didn't feel funny. On his next stop, he called his daughter from the cab, just to hear her voice. They talked about her job, her kids, the neighbor's dog, normal things that anchored him to the world that had grocery lists and school runs and morning coffee. He didn't mention the noises in the sleeper. What was he going to say that something invisible had decided to ride along? After a month of this, the fear softened into something else. Not acceptance, exactly, but a wary coexistence. He noticed small patterns. The sounds were more frequent on certain stretches of road. There was a particular hill in one state where the bunk always seemed occupied for a few minutes. The shift of weight just there, back pressed to the wall, as if whatever it was liked the view. He started talking out loud sometimes, just to break the silence. "Long way to go tonight," he'd say. "Hope you're comfortable back there." No answer ever came. but the taps on the seat grew less sharp, as if a tension had eased. Out of curiosity, he checked old news stories about accidents on some of those roads, on his phone in diners between runs. He found plenty. This highway had seen everything: rollovers, icy pileups, folks falling asleep at the wheel. One incident, buried in archives, caught his eye. A solo driver, running a similar route, had gone off the road late at night not far from where Earl first heard the thump in his sleeper. No one else involved, no obvious cause beyond driver fatigue. He stared at the headline for a long time. On a calm, cold night a few weeks later, as he crossed that same section, the unseen presence in the bunk felt closer than ever. The mattress dipped with a weight that seemed almost familiar now. Earl cleared his throat. "You didn't get where you were going, did you?" he said quietly. The cab hummed. The road hissed under his tires. "I will," he added after a moment. "You can. Ride along, long as you like, but you're not touching the wheel." He hit a small bump then, the kind he'd driven over 100 times. The entire cab shuddered. From the sleeper, for the first and only time, there came a sound that didn't feel accidental at all. 2 light taps on the wall. Almost like a knuckle, almost like agreement. His neck prickled, but he found that his hands relaxed on the wheel, just a fraction. Months turned into another year. The presence never showed itself. It never spoke. It never did anything but sit quietly in the space behind him on some nights, shifting now and then, like any tired passenger. Some runs it didn't show up at all. Those trips felt strangely empty. When younger drivers complained about lonely stretches or bad dreams in their sleepers, Earl would offer the practical advice: stop often, keep the cab tidy, crack a window for fresh air. He left the stranger parts out. On his last long-haul run before retirement, Earl hit his favorite stretch of interstate just before dawn. The sky was lightening, a deep blue smudge along the horizon. The world felt hushed and waiting. In the rear view, the bunk's blanket lay smooth. No dent, no movement. Just the fabric catching the first hint of day. He felt the familiar, almost expected shift of weight behind him then. A mild sinking of the mattress, a soft creak. He smiled, eyes on the road. "Almost there," he said. "Time to let somebody else do the driving." The sun edged up, painting the cab in gold. The noises in the sleeper faded as the light grew stronger, like mist burning off a field. By the time he pulled into the yard for the last time and killed the engine, the bunk was just a bunk again, empty, clean, ordinary. Earl stepped down, joints protesting, and looked back once at the cab that had carried him through so many nights. "Thanks for the company," he said under his breath, not entirely sure who he was addressing. The truck sat silent, cooling metal ticking. And somewhere out on those dark miles, where rest areas glow like islands and headlights carve thin lanes through the night, some drivers say they feel a cautious dip in their mattress, a gentle weight settling in the sleeper when the road is quietest. They don't always talk about it, but a few, the ones who've been out there long enough, leave one corner of the bunk clear and say, half joking, that it doesn't hurt to have someone watching your back while you sleep, even if you never see their face. Story number 5. The first time the sign spoke directly to him, Tom Haller thought he'd misread it. He was rolling west just after midnight, the highway a dark ribbon running between low hills. His 18-wheeler hummed along at a steady 65, the dash lights a soft, familiar glow. The radio was down low, just enough to keep him company. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, no moon, no stars, just black, and the shallow pools of light from far-off farmhouses. Overhead, an electronic message sign appeared in the distance that blocky orange glow drivers knew well. Usually it was the same handful of warnings. Work zone ahead. Expect delays. Amber alert. Tom watched it absently as he approached, eyes on the road, mind already guessing the message. As his headlights washed upward, the letters came into focus. Blue Freight, 7,221. GHK brakes now. He blinked. That was his company. And 7,221 was stamped in white on the side of his tractor, a number he'd seen so many times he hardly noticed it anymore. The sign flickered once, then the message scrolled back through. The same as before, no extra line, no explanation. For a second he wondered if he'd nodded off and dreamed it, but the orange letters were right there, sharp against the night. A second later, the message changed to something generic, bridge work 12 miles, as if it had never been personal at all. Tom's fingers tightened on the wheel. Must be some new dot thing, he muttered. Plate readers, truck IDs. It wouldn't surprise him if the state had started targeting messages. Cameras watched every lane these days. Still, he'd never seen a sign call out a truck by number. He let the thought itch at him for another mile. Then, with a soft curse, he hit his turn signal and eased onto the next wide shoulder, far from any exit. The world narrowed to the hiss of gravel under his tires, and the long, low rush of an occasional car sliding past on the main line. He set the parking brake, flipped on his hazards, and climbed down with his flashlight and a worn pair of gloves. Cold air hit him, damp and still. The big orange glow of the sign was already far behind, out of sight. Tom checked his brakes one by one, circling the rig with the practiced movements of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He ran his light along the hoses, the fittings, the drums. He listened for leaks, felt for any strange heat. Everything looked normal. Too normal. He straightened up at the last axle, breath puffing in the chill, and sighed. Just tech getting cute, he said under his breath. Back in the cab, he merged onto the highway again. The unease rode with him for a few miles, then settled into the background the way most worries did after enough asphalt. The second sign came an hour later. He'd passed through a small city, its lights staining the low clouds orange, and was back in open country. Fields, a dark line of trees, the suggestion of a river. The road dipped and curved gently. The traffic had thinned until it was mostly him and a few scattered headlights far ahead. Another electronic sign glimmered into view above the lanes. He told himself not to look too hard. It would say something ordinary. Construction. Fog. Deer. The letters scrolled into shape as he approached. Tom. Stay in cab. At next stop, his hands went cold on the wheel. This time it wasn't just his truck number. It was his name. The one on his license, the one dispatch used. He tried to tell himself there could be a dozen Toms on this stretch of road. But the way the message sat on those 3 lines felt focused, like someone meeting his eyes. The sign blinked. The words repeated, line by line. Then, as before, the board cleared, and a new message came up in the same square. Official font. Rest area, 2 miles. Exit right. The world outside stayed the same, dark, quiet, peaceful. No hint of anything worth a warning. Tom swallowed. His mouth had gone dry. Glitch, he said aloud. Just a glitch. He watched the green rest area sign slide past on the shoulder. His right blinker clicked on almost by habit. It was as good a place as any for a bathroom break and a stretch. The electronic board's words floated in his mind. Stay in cab. He argued with himself in the span of a few seconds. He could ignore it. Go in, use the restroom, grab a snack from the vending machines. He'd done it 100 times, in 100 places, that looked just like this. He could also remember the first real wreck he'd passed as a new driver. The crumpled car against the guardrail, the sheet on the ground, the way the electronic sign 2 miles before it had said, use caution, in the same bland, uncaring letters. Back then, he'd thought, signs know, in their own way. They remember where the bad things happen. Tonight, one of them knew his name. His blinker kept ticking. At the last second, he snorted under his breath and flicked it off. Fine, he said. Have it your way. He rolled past the rest area exit without slowing. As his cab lined up with the ramp, he turned his head just enough to glance down it. The lot lay in a shallow curve, lit by tall lamps. A handful of cars, 2 trucks, a small brick building. In the instant his beams slid over it, he noticed one detail that stuck. Someone was moving between the parked vehicles, too close to the cabs. A slim figure in a dark hoodie, hands on door handles as if checking them, one by one. As Tom's rig roared by overhead, the person looked up in his direction. He couldn't make out a face at that distance, but the slow, measuring way the head turned left a film of ice along his spine. Then the angle changed, the view vanished, and the rest area slipped behind him. The CB crackled to life a few minutes later. Any westbound pass that rest area at mile 92? A voice asked, a little breathless. Got some weird guy knocking on doors out here. Tried my handle twice. I'm calling 911, but it'll be a bit. Tom reached for the mic. Yeah, he said. Just went by. Saw him from the ramp. Stay locked up, driver. Plan on it, the other man replied. Appreciate the shout. Tom hung the mic back in its clip, heart thumping louder than it should have. He didn't look for the next sign. When it came, 20 miles on, he saw it anyway. Wind warning. High profile V. Use caution. Just that. Normal. Expected. The rig rocked a little under a gust a few minutes later. All within reason. Tom drove into the small hours, the night smoothing out until it felt like one long, low breath. The seeds of doubt about those earlier messages settled in his thoughts like small stones. State systems could call up plate numbers. Maybe they'd rolled out some upgrade that linked registration to personal records. His name, his company, his truck number data scattered across different databases, all pulled together by a computer someplace. A clever way to get drivers to pay attention. It made sense. Mostly. Near 3 in the morning, he reached the loneliest stretch of his route. The highway straightened, cutting through gentle, empty hills. No towns. No farm lights. Just the occasional reflector stake flashing back his beams. The next sign glowed on the horizon. Smaller this time, mounted on a metal trailer at the side of the road, the kind DOT rolled out for temporary warnings. No work cones, no arrow boards. Just the sign, humming softly. As he drew close, the letters shifted awake. Do not pass. Black sedan. In left lane. There was no black sedan in sight. Not in front of him. Not in his mirrors. Traffic behind was a pair of distant white pinpricks. Too far to tell the type. Tom glanced at his speedometer, glanced at the almost empty road, glanced at the sign. Sure, he said under his breath. Why not? He stayed put in the right lane, cruise set, eyes on the mirrors. 2 minutes later, a dark shape slid up in the left. A small car. Black paint absorbing what little light there was. No running lights, just the faint white of its headlights. It had come up fast. It lingered beside his trailer for a moment, then eased forward until it was just ahead of his bumper. From where he sat, Tom could see a hand on the steering wheel, a profile bent slightly over it. The driver never glanced in his direction. The sedan hovered in the left lane, maybe a car length in front of his truck, not pulling away, not dropping back. If the sign hadn't said anything, Tom might have nudged his speed up to pass and be done with it. Something about sitting like that, boxed in, made him uneasy. Instead, he tapped the cruise down a few clicks. Put a little extra distance between them. Not 60 seconds later, one of the car's rear tires blew. It was a dull bang more than a sharp crack, swallowed by road noise. The sedan jerked, tail swinging, red brake lights flaring. The driver overcorrected, the car fishtailing wildly in its own lane. Tom's foot went hard to the brake. His headlights caught the full dance of the spin, the flash of metal, the wild tilt as the sedan crossed in front of his hood and slid toward the median. Dirt kicked up in a brief, dusty cloud. The car came to rest at an angle in the grass, hazard lights already blinking. Tom's truck slowed in a long, controlled arc. His heart slammed against his ribs, the old instinctive fear of not having enough room rising bright and sharp. He eased past on the shoulder, careful, watching the driver move inside the sedan alive, from what he could tell, fighting with a seatbelt. The man turned his head. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met through the glass. Then Tom was beyond him, rolling again. He fumbled for the CB mic. Car in the median, westbound near 106, he called. Black sedan left lane, had a blowout. Driver's up, looks shaken. Somebody call it in. Another voice answered, already on it. The portable sign with the warning repeated in his mirror, orange letters bright, then shrank into the dark. For the next half hour, Tom drove with every sense sharpened. The highway seemed less like a strip of pavement and more like a thin line through something wider and less defined. He started thinking, unwillingly, about a different night years ago, about a sign that had said, "Ice possible on bridge," and how he'd dismissed it because the pavement looked dry and clear, about the slight drift of his trailer as he'd come over that rise, about the car in front of him that had tapped its brakes at the wrong moment. The wreck hadn't been entirely his fault. Everyone said so, but the images had clung anyway. Spinning, metal, voices, the red and blue lights, a single name in the news the next day. He had never told anyone that he still saw that sign when he closed his eyes sometimes. Orange letters hovering in the dark. The last message board before his turnoff loomed around 4 a.m., standing alone on a bare stretch of highway like a watchman. Its screen was blank as he approached, the box of LEDs dark. 10 seconds later, as his truck drew level, the board flickered. One line of text came up, steady and bright. "You saw it this time." Then another. "Keep going." Tom's chest went tight. The letters didn't scroll. They didn't change. They just hung there as he passed, reflected faintly in the passenger side glass. For an instant, he imagined a hand, somewhere behind that grid of lights, reaching out through circuits and steel. By the time he checked his mirror, the board had gone dark again. In the morning light, other drivers on that same road saw nothing but the usual highway messages, lane closures, travel times, an alert about a missing child. Tom finished his run, dropped his trailer, and checked in at dispatch. On the office TV, muted news. Footage showed the aftermath of a multi-vehicle accident on a stretch of interstate he'd just left behind. Fog. A jackknife truck. Car's nose to tail. The anchor's lips moved around words he couldn't hear. A banner at the bottom of the screen named the mile marker. It was a few exits after he'd turned off to his customer. Tom watched for a moment, then looked away. Later, over coffee in the break room, he thought about telling someone what the signs had said. He pictured their expressions. Jokes about glitchy software. Nervous laughs. Maybe a story in return, about brake lights that came on a second before the driver touched the pedal, or GPS voices that sometimes knew closed roads weren't closed anymore. In the end, he said nothing. He went back out on the road that night, under a new stretch of sky. The message boards glowed the way they always had, calm and official. Fog ahead. Watch for deer. Drive safely. Still, every time he saw one switch from blank to text, his heart gave a small, involuntary jump. And every so often, on the loneliest miles, when the world was just his headlights and the sound of the engine, Tom would catch a glimpse of orange letters that seemed to form his name or his number, only to blink into some standard warning the moment he blinked. He drove a little more carefully after that, not just because of the memories, not just because of the wrecks he'd seen, but because somewhere between the wires and the databases and the long, empty stretches of asphalt, something seemed to be watching, remembering, and, in its own strange way, trying to keep him between the lines. Story number 6. Most truckers had stories about voices on the air, but Nate Lawson always figured most of them were just boredom dressed up as legend. He liked the CB. He grew up listening to it in his dad's cab on long summer hauls, dozing in the jump seat to the rhythm of crackling chatter. As an adult, the radio was his company on the long night runs, weather updates, jokes, warnings about bears with hair dryers. Nate drove mostly east-west along the spine of the Appalachians, a route of slow grades and sharp curves where fog slid into the valleys and clung low to the road. The line he ran that fall took him across 3 states and through a particularly lonely stretch of interstate that locals called the Hollow. The Hollow was 22 miles of dark, tree-lined highway, with no exits and no services, just rock face on one side and forested drop-off on the other. Cell reception cut in and out. In the rain, it felt like driving through a narrow, wet tunnel. Most nights, Channel 19 carried enough life to make it seem less empty. That first night, the airways were dead. It was after 1 in the morning. Rain feathered against Nate's windshield, the wipers moving in a steady, almost hypnotic arc. His dash lights glowed blue-green, steady as a heartbeat. The world beyond his headlights was just wet black and the pale gleam of lane lines. He thumbed the CB mic, scanning through the channels. Static. A faint, distant voice, too garbled to catch. Somebody coughing. Then more static. "Quiet night," he murmured. He let the scan run, channels ticking past in quick, electronic blips. 38, 39, 40. Then, abruptly, a soft chime sounded over the speaker. Not the rough burst of static he was used to, but a clear, bell-like tone. The channel number on his display didn't match anything he recognized. Ling, he frowned. CBs didn't have a channel 0. They ran 1 through 40, with some shared oddities in between, but nothing labeled like that. Before he could reach for the dial, a voice came through. "Roll call in effect," it said calmly. "Northbound, southbound, all lanes. This is midnight control." The voice sounded like a dispatcher's, steady, measured, strangely emotionless. It was clearer than any CB transmission Nate had ever heard. almost like someone speaking inside the cab with him. He eased off the throttle just a hair, listening. Unit. Greyhound coach I-75 northbound. Mile marker 260. 1. The voice went on. 2 tires lost. Minor injuries. Delay 27 minutes. Nate's brows drew together. He'd heard police scanners before. This wasn't one. CB could bleed in weird signals sometimes, but this had no background hiss. No overlapping noise. Unit. Box truck. US 19 southbound. Marker 88. The voice continued. Engine failure. Shoulder clear. No injuries. Nate checked his display again. Still. Channel 0. The rain tapped its rhythm on the glass. The road curved through the trees. The concrete barrier rising on his left. This had to be some new kind of relay, maybe a regional dispatch channel bouncing off the wrong repeater. He was about to shut the whole thing off when the voice changed. Unit. Westbound semi. Handle Blue Runner. It said. I-26 westbound. Marker 141. Lane departure. Trailer jackknife. 2 vehicles impacted. 1 serious injury. Nate froze. He knew that handle. He'd just heard Blue Runner on 19 3 hours earlier, complaining about the coffee at a truck stop. ETA, 8 minutes. The voice added calmly. Weather, light rain, visibility, reduced. Nate's gaze dropped involuntarily to his own clock. 1:16 a.m. He licked his lips. Midnight control out, the voice said. The soft chime sounded again, like a tone at the end of a call. The CB went back to static. He drove another mile in silence, listening only to the rain and the hum of his engine. Finally, he shook his head. Somebody's idea of a joke, he muttered. Creepy, but a joke. He flicked back to channel 19. A few minutes later, voices cut through the static again. Any westbound catch that mess up on 26? A driver was saying. Blue Runner's in it. Jackknife between 140 and 142. Looks bad. Troopers everywhere. Been sitting here 15 minutes already, another chimed in. Heard a car got it real rough. Nate's fingers tightened around the wheel. He listened as they compared mile markers, times, what they'd seen. The details lined up too well with what that strange, calm voice had said. He told himself it was coincidence. Drivers always talked accidents up, times and distances blurred on the air. He drove on. It wasn't until the second time he heard it that he started to believe something else might be happening. A week later, Nate was coming back east through the hollow. The night was clear. Stars pinpricked through the black above the rim of the trees. The highway slid along the side of a steep hill, the guardrail marking a sharp fall into darkness beyond. It was nearly the same time, just past 1. Channel 19 was mostly quiet. A lone driver mentioned a fog bank 2 states over. Someone else sang along badly to a song Nate didn't recognize. He hit scan again, letting the numbers climb. 38. 39. 40. Chime. Ling. Roll call in effect, the calm voice said. This is midnight control. All lanes. Ida. Nate's hand hovered over the dial. He didn't switch away. Unit. Eastbound sedan, I-40, marker 312, the voice intoned. Single vehicle, guardrail impact, non-fatal. He swallowed. Unit. Southbound tanker, Route 11, marker 50. 2. Brake failure. Off-ramp collision. Minor. Static seemed to hold its breath between each line. Unit. Westbound semi, handle northbound Nate. Truck 587, the voice said next. I-64 eastbound, the hollow, marker 172. Multi-vehicle pileup. Visibility. Sudden obstruction. Time to event. 11 minutes. The cab seemed to shrink. Cold tingled across Nate's scalp. His handle. His equipment number. His exact highway. The only thing off was the direction. And the hollow didn't care if you were labeled eastbound or westbound once you were in it. He forced himself to glance at the next mile marker as it flicked by. Ibaloshi. 11 miles. 11 minutes at his current speed. His foot moved toward the brake without his consent. Then he stopped himself. It's messing with your head, he whispered. That's all. He thought about the last time, about Blue Runner, about the way the times had lined up. He thought about the way the hollow's curves tightened in the dark, how the drop on his right fell into black nothing. Advisory, the voice added, still calm, still flat. If you hear your handle and roll call, you may alter trajectory. Do not respond on this channel. Nate stared at the radio. Midnight control out, it said. The gentle chime sounded again. Static rushed back in like a held breath released. He reached for the mic, an old instinct to ask who was playing around, to call their bluff. His fingers stopped an inch away. Do not respond on this channel. Channel 19 crackled faintly in the background. You catching this weather pattern, eastbound? Someone else was saying. Stars out where I am, but they're calling for a quick fog up in the hollow. Watch those curves, boys. Nate's breath came louder than he liked. He checked his dash clock. 1:05. 10 minutes. He flipped the CB off entirely, silencing the hiss. The sudden absence of noise was almost physical. The next mile marker, 162, rose and fell on his right. The hollow wouldn't let him exit for another 20 miles. There were no official turnouts, no service roads, just the narrow shoulder and the long rail. He thought about the old runaway truck ramp he'd passed on the westbound side years ago, now overgrown with weeds. About the one wide gravel patch, half legit, drivers sometimes used to check their loads. He knew this road. He knew where that gravel patch was. Mile 168. He'd never stopped there. Never needed to. His hands sweated against the wheel. Change trajectory, the voice had said. Not stop. Not turn around. Just change it. He could cut his speed. Crawl through the hollow at 40 instead of 60. But if the warning was about something sudden, a car stalled in the blind curve. An animal. A rockfall that might not be enough. Headlights behind him appeared as two small dots far back on the incline. He had time if he used it. At 167, he made up his mind. He eased off the throttle, flipped his four-ways on, and brought the truck down, until he was rolling at 20. The engine brake hummed softly. When the gravel patch came into view, a charcoal smear of rough shoulder just before a gentle bend, he guided the rig onto it, feeling the crunch under his tires. He set the brake. The cab rocked once and settled. He turned his headlights off. The dark outside his windshield grew almost complete. Only a faint wash of starlight outlined the tops of the trees. His dash still glowed. His heart thumped. He sat there and listened. 2 minutes passed, then 4. A distant engine note grew louder, a horn somewhere far below in the hollow. Tires on wet pavement, a gust of air as something large displaced it. Then, abruptly, the night erupted in light. Around the bend ahead, the whole curve flashed red and white. Brake lights, headlights, reflections stuttering across the guardrail. A horn blared long and fierce, the kind that came from a driver with no room left. Metal shrieked, not the sound of tearing flesh, just the ugly grind of steel folding and sliding. Another horn, shorter, panicked, more light. A kind of rolling thud that carried through the rock. Then quiet. Not absolute, but the strange, muffled quiet after chaos. When all the initial motion has stopped, Nate realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it go in a shaky rush and forced himself to inhale again. The headlights he'd seen behind him had vanished into that mess somewhere around the bend. He flicked his own lights back on. The cab filled with their familiar glow. The trees nearest him stood unchanged, leaves silvered. His phone buzzed in its cradle. Service, spotty but present, caught up. A notification from his traffic app popped up on the screen. Accident reported. I-64, Ebb, mile marker 172. All lanes blocked. Time stamped. Agen, 16. AM. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he reached for the CB and turned it back on. Static flooded the cab. Any eastbound in the hollow, you copy? A strained voice was saying. We got a mess at 172. Truck sideways. Couple four-wheelers piled. Roads shut both ways. Need somebody to hold the line back there. Nate swallowed and pressed the talk button. Breaker, he said. This is northbound Nate, sitting at about 168 on the gravel. I'm clear. I'll light up and stop him for you. Appreciate you, Nate, the other voice said, genuine relief in it. He pulled forward just enough to angle his truck across most of the lane, hazard strobing. Within minutes, other rigs stacked up behind him in a grudging but orderly line. Far ahead, the blue and red ghosts of emergency lights flickered off the low clouds. Nobody asked why he'd stopped where he had. There was enough confusion without adding that kind of question. It wasn't until hours later, parked at a rest area beyond the reopened hollow, that he let himself think about the voice on Channel 0. He sat on the edge of his bunk, hands hanging between his knees, the afterimage of that sudden flare of light still stamped on his eyelids. He hadn't heard the chime again. The CB had behaved like any other old piece of gear the rest of the night. In the truck stop diner the next afternoon, he brought it up cautiously over coffee with a couple of older drivers. "You ever get anything weird on the radio out here?" he asked. "Like a dispatcher that isn't really there?" The oldest of them, a man with a beard as gray as the highway in rain, stirred his sugar slowly. "You mean Channel 0? He asked without looking up. Nate's grip tightened on his mug. "You've heard it," he said. The older man shrugged one shoulder. "Every few years," he said. "Usually in the hollow or near it. Some say it's just spillover from state dispatch. Some say it's leftover. Something from that big pileup they had back in '98. 30, some vehicles. Fog so thick folks said you couldn't see your hood." He tapped his spoon against the mug. "Truckers swear they heard a calm voice on the air that night, calling out units and mile markers before the troopers even knew what was going on," he added. "Course. Stories grow in the telling. What do you do if you hear it?" Nate asked quietly. The older man's eyes met his. "You listen," he said, "and you don't talk back. Radios, like roads, got places where things cross that ain't on any map. Best I can tell, that voice ain't trying to hurt anybody. Just reading off what it knows. Maybe giving you a chance to step sideways if you're paying attention." Nate thought of the gentle chime, the way his own handle had sounded in that even tone, the brief flare of chaos around the bend. "Anyone ever answer it?" he asked. The older man looked out the window at the rows of trucks baking in the afternoon sunday. "Couple claim they did," he said finally. "Called out, asked who it was. They're still driving far as I know. But every one of them says the same thing that for a long time after. Every wreck they passed felt like one they should have been in, like their name got written down somewhere it didn't used to be." He pushed his mug away slightly. "I figure that's too much weight to carry," he said. That night, back on the road, Nate kept the CB on 19. He let the ordinary noise fill the cab. He didn't hit scan when the hollow sign loomed ahead. Still, as the miles and the years rolled on, he sometimes heard the faintest suggestion of a chime under the static, like a sound remembered more than heard. And once, on a foggy anniversary of that night, drifting through the low valley miles away on a different highway, he woke from a brief doze at a rest area with the strong, inexplicable feeling he'd been talking in his sleep. His throat was dry, his chest ached. The CB was on. The display for a heartbeat showed a flicker of something that looked like a 0 before settling on 19. Out on the interstate, a convoy rolled through the dark, radios hissing. Somewhere, in the crackle, a calm voice might have been saying someone else's handle, someone else's mile marker. Nate didn't know for sure, but when he pulled back onto the highway and saw the next reflective sign glint, 172, in his headlights, he checked his mirrors, eased his speed just a little, and kept on going. Story number 7. By the time Sarah Keene reached the county line, the stars had come out clear and sharp, sprinkled thick across the sky like salt. Her rig rolled west along a 2-lane highway, a refrigerated trailer humming softly behind her, the cab a warm cocoon of yellow dashboard light and low engine noise. It was just past midnight on a Tuesday. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing. Fields spread out on either side, dark, flat stretches, broken only by the occasional tree line or windbreak. Now and then, a farmhouse glowed far back from the road, one square of light in a sea of black. Sarah liked this part of the run. The night felt big but not threatening. The air through the cracked driver's window was cool, carrying the faint scent of cut hay and damp earth. The CB was on low, tuned to 19. A couple of drivers were trading mileage and coffee reviews, their voices fading in and out with distance. Her GPS showed a smooth, straight line ahead. She had about 3 hours left before she'd pull into the distribution center on the edge of a mid-sized city. If everything went right, she'd be backed into a dock and in her bunk by 4:30. At the last truck stop before the long, empty stretch, she'd taken 20 minutes filled up, grabbed coffee, and listened to the usual counter-talk. That was when one of the older drivers had mentioned mile 60. "You running 47 tonight?" he'd asked, stirring powdered creamer into his cup. "Yeah," Sarah had said. "Why?" Had given a crooked half smile. "You'll hit the blackout mile then," he'd said lightly. "Around 60. Make sure your lights are good." She'd raised an eyebrow. "You mean bad wiring? Curve that eats headlights?" "Something like that." Another driver had chimed in. "I ran it a few years back. Everything went dark for maybe 10 seconds. Dash, headlights, phone. Thought my alternator died. Came back on just as I was about to pull it over." They'd laughed, but it hadn't been a big belly kind of laugh. More like people whistling past something they didn't intend to think about too hard. Sarah had checked her logbook, shrugged. 10 seconds of dark doesn't scare me, she'd said. "I've driven through whole states where the streetlights forgot they exist." "Not like this," the first driver had replied. "This is different. You'll see. Or you won't." He'd sipped his coffee, eyes sliding away to the TV in the corner. Now, 2 hours later, their words drifted back to her as the green highway sign loomed ahead in her headlights. "State route. 47. Next right." Her GPS chirped calmly. "Take the exit on the right." She could have stayed on the main interstate, but a construction detour had choked it with lane closures and merging traffic. Dispatch had routed her onto 47 instead, a straighter shot that cut across nearly empty land for 50 miles before rejoining the main artery. She signaled and eased onto the ramp. The pavement changed texture under her tires, a subtle shift she felt through the steering wheel. The two-lane curled briefly, then straightened into a long, narrow ribbon heading west. There were no overhead lights here, just her own beams cutting through the dark. She checked her mirrors, no other headlights behind her. Ahead, nothing but a mile marker, standing solitary at the edge of the grass. Mile 41. She settled in. Radio low, cruise set, one hand draped at the top of the wheel, the other on her coffee. The minutes slid by in a quiet rhythm. The markers counted up. 45. 48. 52. The land grew flatter. The scattered houses grew sparser, then disappeared altogether. Trees thinned out into occasional clumps. "Feels like driving through the bottom of a bowl," she murmured. A soft voice on the CB answered someone else's question 2 states over. A joke about roadside food. Familiar noise. At mile 55, the sky ahead changed. Up until then, the stars had been steady, hard points of white. Now, a dark smudge rose along the horizon, blotting them out. At first, Sarah thought it was just a low bank of cloud, one of those lazy systems that drifted in without wind. Within a minute, half the visible sky in front of her had gone black, not with depth, but with flatness like a thumb smeared over a painting. She frowned, leaning forward a little. The air through the window felt the same. The road under her tires didn't tremble or tilt, but the sense of open space ahead had closed up. Somehow, the CB crackled, then went oddly quiet, the light on the unit still glowing, but the sound dropping to a soft, empty hiss. She passed mile 57. The dark sky patch now swallowed almost everything in front of her. The stars above the cab remained clear. It was just ahead that was wrong. Sarah's hand drifted to the headlight switch on reflex, checking it even though her beams shone solid on the asphalt. The next marker slid by. Mile 58. The dash lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, then came back, a heartbeat's flicker. Her radio screen glitched, the station display turning into a smear of digital nonsense before returning to the song title. "Okay," she said under her breath. "That's new." She checked the voltmeter. It sat steady in the normal range. No sign of a failing alternator, no warnings lit up on the panel. Up ahead, the darkness thickened, not like fog, not like rain, but like someone hanging a huge curtain in the air. The edges were too sharp. Her pupils tightened in instinctive response, as if she were heading into a tunnel, even though there was no structure over the road, just empty air and that strange star-eating dark. Mile 59. Sarah's fingers wrapped more firmly around the wheel. She eased off the cruise control, taking manual grip. Her right foot feathered the accelerator. The CB cut out completely. No hiss, no static. Just a dead, flat silence from the speaker, the little green indicator still lit as if everything was fine. Her phone, sitting in its dash mount, dimmed its screen without prompting. The GPS voice stuttered once, retraced the last syllable it had said, then fell quiet. The map froze, the tiny arrow of her vehicle stuck in place. She glanced up. The dark was no longer ahead. It was on her. For one surreal second, she could see the dividing line between the ordinary night behind her and the absence in front, like the shadow of an eclipse moving across an old road. Then she crossed it. Mile 60. Every light in the cab went out. The dashboard, the radio, the GPS screen, even the tiny LED on the CB all snapped to black. Her headlights vanished as if someone had reached down and unplugged the world. Sarah gasped. Her breath sounded too loud in the sudden, impenetrable dark. The engine kept running. She could feel its vibration through the floor, hear the low drone of it. The steering wheel still pulsed faintly in her hands with the rhythm of the tires on pavement. But she could not see a thing. Her eyes registered nothing. No road, no hood, no faint glow of sky. Just a complete, engulfing black. Instinct screamed at her to stomp the brake, to stop right now, to get out and figure out what had failed. Equally strong was the old training lodged in her bones. You never slam to a stop in the lane in the dark if you don't know who's behind you. Her heart hammered. She forced herself to breathe in, out, steady. The seat cradled her. The familiar weight of the wheel under her fingers was the only fixed point. "Okay," she said, voice small in the dark. "Okay, Sarah. Straight lane. No curves yet. You know this road on the map. Keep it straight." She eased her right foot off the accelerator until the engine sound dropped, then feathered the brake slow, controlled pressure. The truck responded. The sensation of deceleration coming through her body, even if the speedometer was dead. She judged they were down to maybe 30. 25. A crawl by highway standards, but still movement. The cab felt occupied. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't felt a change in the weight. But the air carried the faint, almost intangible sense that she wasn't alone anymore. The same feeling you got walking into a room someone had just left the leftover warmth. The suggestion of presence. Something tapped, very gently, on the passenger side window. 3 rapid, light taps. Not the aggressive pound of someone trying to force entry. More like knuckles testing glass. Sarah's throat closed. She did not turn her head. The truck kept rolling. The invisible road hummed under her. Another sound brushed along the length of the trailer, barely audible over the engine, a dry, whispery scrape, like fingertips running down a dusty wall. It started near the nose of the trailer and moved backward, slow and steady, all the way to the doors. Her scalp crawled. Just wind, she told herself, teeth clenched. Weird crosswind, branches, something. But the sound had been too even, too deliberate. The air in the cab cooled. A faint, trickling chill slid down the back of her neck, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. She exhaled in a short, involuntary burst. A pale cloud appeared briefly in front of her face, visible in the dimmest hint of glow from somewhere outside, then vanished. Cold enough to see her breath. In late summer, from far away so far she almost thought she imagined it, a voice crackled through the dead CB. The unit's light was still off. Yet over the speaker came a thin, intermittent whisper of sound. "Keep going." The words were barely formed, stretched and hollow. They could have been static. They could have been wind. They sounded like more than one person, voices layered. Sarah's fingers dug into the leather of the wheel. She realized she'd slowed almost to a crawl. The engine tone had dropped low. She forced her foot to ease the accelerator back up, just enough to feel the truck regain a little momentum. If she was, in fact, still on the road. That thought jolted her. For the first time, a sliver of panic cut through her concentration. What if she drifted? Without lane lines, without visual cues, a slight lean of the wheel could have taken her over the fog line, into the grass, toward a ditch she couldn't see. She lifted her left hand, found the window control by feel, and lowered the glass an inch. Night air flooded in, sharp and too still. She listened. The tire noise sounded even on both sides. No change in the texture of the sound that would tell her she was half on asphalt, half off. No crunch of gravel. Somewhere out beyond the dark, perhaps 100 feet away, she thought she heard something. A faint, wet rustle. The soft hush of what might have been clothes against cloth. The suggestion of bare feet on pavement. Lightning flickered far off to her left, behind the curtain of dark. For less than a second, a thin wash of very distant light brushed the road. In that flicker, she saw enough to fix in her mind. The road was arrowy straight, a gray ribbon. Her truck was centered between the lines. On either side, cornfields rose in dense, tall rows. And along the right shoulder, for just that brief heartbeat of illumination, she saw shapes. They were spaced out in an uneven line, facing the road. Dark, upright outlines, some taller, some shorter, like a handful of people standing at the edge of the field, watching. She could not see faces, only suggestion. Then the light was gone. The black dropped in again, absolute. Sarah's breath caught on a ragged edge. Her hands tingled. She wanted, desperately, to turn her head and check the passenger window, to see if anyone stood there, inches from the glass. She kept her eyes forward. The scrape along the trailer came again, this time from back to front, as if whatever hands had trailed behind were returning, reaching up the length of the rig. Her emergency flashlight sat in its holder by the door. She grabbed it one-handed and thumbed the switch. Nothing. She shook it, hit the button again. Dead. The batteries were fresh. She'd used it at the truck stop a few hours ago. Now, in this darkness, it might as well have been a stick. Her phone vibrated in its cradle not with an incoming call, but with the brief, insecta-like buzz of a notification. The screen stayed black. The dead CB whispered again. "Don't stop. Keep straight. Almost through." The words dissolved into hiss. Sarah's mind grabbed onto the last phrase like a lifeline. Almost through. The old driver at the truck stop had said it lasted about a mile. A minute, maybe less, at highway speed. She'd been moving slower, maybe 30 for some of it, but she had to be nearly across whatever this was. She fixed her gaze on where the road should be. 1 minute, she said, voice thin. You can do 1 minute. Straight. Forward. She counted slowly under her breath. 20. 30. 40. The chill in the cab deepened. The fabric of the seat felt almost damp, cold through her jeans. Her every instinct screamed that something waited just beyond her periphery. Something that would become too real if she turned her head. She did not turn her head. At 53, the CB made a small popping sound. The dashboard flickered, one gauge needle jerking, a warning light blinking on, off, on, then disappearing. A thin, ghostly glow began to seep back into the outline of the radio. At 60, the world snapped back. Her headlights burst on, white and blinding after the black. The dashboard lit like a small sunrise. The GPS beeped impatiently. The CB clunked back to its normal hiss. She squinted, momentarily dazzled, then blinked hard. The road stretched ahead, perfectly ordinary. The cornfields flanked it, rustling slightly in a faint breeze. The sky above was open and star-filled again. The weird curtain of dark gone, as if it had never been. She drove another 100 yards before her legs remembered they could move. Then she eased the truck onto the wide, flat shoulder by habit and set the brake with a shaky pull. The hazards clicked on, their red pulses steady and reassuring. For a long moment, she just sat there, hands still poised on the wheel, heart hammering. The cab looked the same as it always did. The air warmed slowly. Her breath no longer showed. She reached for the flashlight again and thumbed it on. This time, the beam sprang to life, bright and harsh in the confined space. She clambered down out of the cab, boots hitting gravel. The night air outside felt almost normal cool, with a faint hint of damp soil and corn. Crickets sang somewhere in the fields. The road behind her lay empty. No other headlights. No cars. She walked the length of her rig slowly, the flashlight cutting a path along the white trailer walls. Halfway down the passenger side, she paused. The metal was dusty, road grime dulling the paint. In that dust, at about shoulder height, several long streaks ran back toward the rear doors, as if something or several somethings had dragged their hands along it. Not clean handprints, not clear enough to see fingers. Just smudges, parallel, uneven in pressure. She ran her gloved hand over them. Her glove came away with a film of dust. Nothing more. Probably scraped some branches or weeds, she said aloud, though there had been no trees close enough to touch her trailer. At the front passenger door, near the handle, a set of smaller smudges dotted the lower panel. They looked almost like prints from someone's palm, and fingers pressed there twice, lightly, and then wiped partially away. Almost. She stood there under the blank normal sky and listened. The world around her was as it had been an hour earlier. Quiet. Open. Ordinary. A faint rumble in the far distance suggested another truck, still miles off. She finished her walk around, found nothing else out of place, and climbed back into the cab. Her phone screen blinked as she picked it up, flooding her eyes with blue-white. The time read 12:38 a.m. A single notification glared at her. No service. Emergency calls only. The GPS map had reset itself, the little arrow repositioning with a stutter. For a second, the route line flickered, showing a blank gap on 47 between mile 59 and mile 61, as if the software couldn't quite decide what existed there. Then the gap filled in, the line smoothing back to normal. The CB crackled. "Anybody else lose power back there?" a driver's voice asked, sounding rattled. "Thought I was going to meet my maker at about 60. Lights, just poof. Gone." "Same here," another replied. "All my dash went black. Came back just as fast." "You stopped?" "No, sir. Kept it pointed straight. Didn't like that at all." Sarah picked up her mic. "Copy, drivers," she said, her own voice steadier than she felt. "Northbound reefer went through it too. Best advice I got? Don't stop. Just keep it straight. It doesn't last long." "Yeah, well, I ain't running 47 again at night," one of them muttered. "Suit yourself," another said. "Road's a road." Someone else, an older voice with a slight drawl, chimed in. "Y'all must have hit the dark cut," he said. "Lost a whole county's power out there years back. Substation blew to pieces. Fog rolled in same night, thick as soup. They had a mess of crashes. Nothing bloody, I'll repeat, just bad news. Folks out of their cars, standing in the road in the dark, trying to wave down trucks that couldn't see 'em. Heard about it ever since I started driving." Sarah listened quietly. "They fixed the lines," the old driver went on. "Put in new poles, new cables, all that. But there's some nights the juice still drops right along that mile, for no good reason. Some say it's just the grid misbehaving. Some say it's that night remembering itself. Whatever it is," another driver said, "I'll take a detour next time. Appreciate the heads up, though." The conversation drifted into other topics. Scattered storms on other routes. A kid at a truck stop showing off card tricks. Life moved on. Sarah rolled slowly back onto the highway. The markers ticked upward. 61. 62. The land did not feel any different on this side of the invisible line. She made her delivery on time, backed into dock 7 inches the pre-dawn half-light, and managed a few hours of cramped, dreamless sleep in her bunk before the warehouse knocked to tell her she was empty. In the daylight, on her way back east a day later, she passed mile 60 again. The sun was high. The sky was clear. The fields lay golden and harmless under the blue. There was no sign of any curtain of dark, no glitch in her radio. The cab lights held steady. At the exact point where the previous night's blackness had dropped over her, her phone chimed. She glanced at it. A voice recorder app she rarely used had popped up on the screen, playing back a clip she had no memory of starting. For 2 seconds, the cab filled with a faint, layered sound. "Keep going." Then the clip ended. The app closed itself. Her home screen returned. She drove on, the hair on her arms lifting, an odd, cold feeling sitting just behind her ribs. From then on, whenever Sarah took 47 at night, she made a quiet habit. As mile 58 approached, she'd lay her fingertips briefly on the dashboard and murmur, just under her breath, "Lights stay on. Keep straight." Most nights, nothing strange happened. The road stayed lit, the CB crackled, the GPS droned on about exits. But every once in a while, for a handful of drivers on certain Blackevsky nights, there was still a stretch of pavement near mile 60 where the stars blinked out, the power dipped, and the world went briefly, utterly dark. Some of them stopped. Some of them swore they'd never take that road again. The ones who didn't stop almost always spoke, afterward, of a feeling they couldn't quite explain. Not just fear, but the prickling, uncomfortable sense that for a minute or two, they had been the ones unseen, moving blindly through someone else's long-ago night, with invisible hands brushing at their doors, hoping to be noticed before the trucks roared past.